Hey. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call our Truckee Town Council meeting of February 22nd, 2022 to order. It's wonderful to be back with everyone in person. Lynn, may I have a roll call, please?
Yes, Councilmember Pallavi.
Here.
Vice Mayor Romack.
Here.
Mayor Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Klövstad.
Here.
And Councilmember Zabriskie.
Here.
Thank you, Lynn. And if everyone would join me in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. We will move on to agenda item 4.0. This is our public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone who would like to make a comment about an item not on the agenda. So with that, I will open public comment. Do we have anyone here this evening who would like to make a public comment? Seeing no one in the room who would like to do that, I will close public comment. And we have a little bit of a change this evening. We're going to move into agenda item 6.0, our consent calendar, and then we're going to come back to 5.0 for our presentations. So our consent calendar this evening, 6.1, the minutes from January 25th and February 8th, our regular and closed sessions. 6.2, claim for damages against the town of Truckee. 6.3, our work from home pilot program laptop purchase. 6.4, appointment of performing arts representative to the Public Art Commission of Truckee. 6.5, request for conversion to Chief Information Technology and Security Office, the addition of a full-time IT systems analyst position and budget amendment. And 6.6, fiscal year 2021-23 quarterly work plan update through December 31st, 2021, and council affirmation of council priorities. Do I have any council member who would like to pull an agenda item this evening? Do I have any member from staff who would like to pull a consent item this evening?
No, thank you, Mayor.
And any member of the public who would like to pull a consent item this evening? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve our consent calendar this evening, please?
I will make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And we are unanimous and consent calendar passes. With that, we're going to turn back to our presentations, so item 5.0, and we'll begin with 5.1. I'm excited to welcome Acting Police Chief Danny Renfro to introduce our new CHP commander.
Yes, hello, Mayor. Good evening, council members. I'd like to introduce Commander Eric Edigi, CHP commander for the area office. Go ahead and stand up over there at the podium if you will. A little bit about Eric. He was born and raised in Novato, California. He's a Truckee resident since 2018. He's married and has 5 kids. 4 are in local schools here in the Truckee district. He has police work in his family. His grandfather was actually the undersheriff of Santa Clara County. Oops. And retired as an acting sheriff. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in finance from California State University, Sacramento, and he's a graduate of the Sherman Block Supervisory Leadership Institute. Let's see. He's worked in the Santa Rosa office and Marin office as an officer and a sergeant. He's been a commander at the Quincy area office for the last 3 years, and since September of 2021, the Truckee commander. Some specialty assignments. He's a member of the CHP Special Response Team. He's a use of force trainer and develops policy for the CHP. He's also been an incident commander at the Tubbs Fire in Sonoma, the North Complex Fire, Dixie Fire, and Beckworth Complex Fire. He put in here that he graduated #1 in his academy class, but I'm not going to mention that. And then he enjoys spending time with his family, playing sports, golfing, coaching. He's a Rotary member, and he likes to vacation in Maui. So Eric and I, our agencies obviously work very closely together, especially with the ski traffic that we've been trying to mitigate for several years now, but it looks like we got a pretty good handle on the inboarding of 89 South traffic. So Eric, if you want to give us a quick little update on our procedure there, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, please.
All right. First off, thanks a lot for having me, and Danny, thanks for the nice intro. And yeah, since moving here in 2018, love Truckee. I was doing the long commute for Quincy, but the kids and my wife Michelle, they've been here, going to schools here, and yeah, we've really, we're doing the ski thing. We started the Tahoe Donner, so I don't want to take up too much time explaining that, but yeah, just really enjoy the town. Appreciate the opportunity to come and say hi and talk a little bit about the program that we've been working closely with Danny and the Truckee Police Department. So 89 South, it's no grand scheme or grand strategy. It was kind of just a simple approach, but I think the biggest part about it is having the personnel and making it happen. So that's usually what a lot of this comes down to. And Danny's team was willing to work with us, and Caltrans being involved too. So the big problem was, right, Interstate 80 starts backing up when 89 South starts backing up. And that was causing problems at Central Truckee, east and westbound. That was causing problems at 89 South, east and westbound. That problem was going back in the Northwoods on Donner Pass Road. You guys all, I don't need to explain and being a resident here, I wanted to get to Ace Hardware quicker, so I figured now's the time to come up with a solution. But, so just real simple. So we work with Palisades closely on their traffic stuff. So we made some improvements down there to prevent 89 from getting backed up. So we've come up with a good plan down there. So we had all this real estate between Palisades and town of Truckee of 89. So why not try and push that volume of cars onto that 9 miles of roadway? And how do we do that efficiently? Truckee Police Department officer and a CHP officer, that's how. And the blinking red lights at the intersections, combined with the presence of the officers, and Caltrans coning the Interstate 80 eastbound off-ramp to flow at the traffic circle. And that combination of everything there has created this nice flow where we're getting all those cars onto 89 South. And we're not seeing any traffic problems there either, because they're getting in the Palisades now, because Palisades has a nice traffic design down at their area. Because we all know, I mean, I say simple because one group of cars stops, and then 2 minutes later another group, and then what happens? You get the big backup. So really it's the officers going out there at 6:30 in the morning, turning the lights to flashing red, and then really staying there until it clears out. And the furthest backup really has now been to about the roundabout, if it even gets there. And I track it whether I'm out there or I'm just tracking it on the response times from like my house, I judge it on, or stuff like that. But it's worked well. And, I think taking that same approach we're working on the North Star, and we've been talking with North Star a lot, and there's been some improvement just in the last couple of weeks, something of getting that right-hand turn lane designated to go in there. But yeah, it's working with our local agencies, Truckee PD and Caltrans, and everybody wants to help out. So and I tell Danny, I mean, being new here, and we're all about just trying to find solutions to issues. I'm not one to say, well, it's always been like that. Well, okay, maybe it can get a little better if we put some people to it. And that's just where we always hear these staffing things and whatnot. So that's where really hats off to Truckee Police for, in a time where maybe staffing isn't for us, we struggle too, but if we're dedicated to doing it now, and it's going to be a thing, because once something works, right, we can't really go back now. But yeah, is there any questions or further explanation that anybody needs?
Anyone on council have any questions for Commander?
I have just one.
Quick one, yeah. So first of all, thank you. It is I told Acting Police Chief Renfro, sorry, the other day. Just, it's an incredibly noticeable difference. I have a ski team kid, so I was part of that problem, and West River's moving incredibly fluidly now. And I also have a business on Donner Pass Road, and there were times where I couldn't even get to my business half the time. And then my actual question and all. So I think it's working great. I'm super happy to hear you're going to continue it. More power to all of you, and let us know how we can help support that, whether it's budgeting or whatever it is. I think it's a huge improvement. My question is, are you seeing now, I know I have, but are you seeing that change? What was starting to happen was we were getting people coming off in Central Truckee, and, they were trying to, come down under MacGyver Crossing and then hop on West River, and that was faster according to Google, but not according to Waze, but Apple said that, right? Like, has there been any... I've seen it dissipate, that cut through, or whatever we're calling it now, but that sort of alternative measure. And my only question is, are you able and seeing any of those platforms be responsive? Are you guys able to sort of tap into any of those platforms in order to cut off, some of those types of shortcut things? Is there any interaction at all with a lot of the new traffic platforms that are sort of keeping people going, in figure eights all over the place?
So no, thanks for it's a good question. We don't have any direct involvement with the platforms, no. But what you're talking about is changing behavior, right? So that was a big conversation about if we can get this 89 South thing going, I think the result will be people will not, your map's not going to say it's quicker going to West River because it's not. And I think just by doing it in the traffic taking care of right, because the app's based on the traffic. So I think it's naturally kind of happened, and we've changed that behavior where that person coming from the Bay or coming eastbound is like, I always, this is our trick. We go to Central Truckee and you don't need to do that anymore. So hopefully now we haven't had a huge storm yet with it, but we had a little this morning, but the guys went out and, cleared it up quick. So on these like Tuesdays, these off days, we'll do our best, and Dan and his guys always show up. They were out at Hurstdale today helping us out with 80, that's why I was a little late, because that's going right now, but that's...
I will say that we do have some control on Waze platform through Waze Community to where we can make a pass non-viable, but there has to be a reason why we're making it non-viable. So it actually has to be non-viable route in order to block that off.
And then my only other quick question, has there been any change or opportunity in that same vein? And I unfortunately missed Hardy's CCC meeting when you guys were all talking about the chain control stuff. But, I would say the other low-hanging fruit is Donner Pass Road, people getting off, again, at the Central Truckee exit and just jamming up Donner Pass Road, thinking they're going to skip chain control, right, or whatever it's going to be. So maybe just planting, some sort of solution, or at least shutting down or creating a gate program at those two. I think those two Central Truckee exits are so critical when people are trying to figure out ways around, and so maybe that would be the next low-hanging fruit, I would say, is when we have chain control at Donner Lake, trying to figure out how we keep people off Donner Pass Road and leave them on the highway, and try to deal with that situation next.
And with that too, and we did talk about it at the meeting with Supervisor Bullock, and my explanation of kind of that is similar to what we've been doing. And it's all about flow. And if we can get and our big thing is keeping the big rigs and the chain vehicles into the chain up areas, and then we can keep those 2 lanes open. And if we keep the 2 lanes open, then hopefully it's flowing and it's not backing up to 89 South, right? That's our first. And then if it really gets bad, then it's further than that. But if we can do those little things out on the road and keep the flow going, then I think Donner Pass Road doesn't become an option. Like I just took, because 80 is a parking lot right now, because it's a hockey rink over the top of the summit, even down the Golden Run. But Donner Pass Road was nice. I took it down.
Yeah, I will say that Caltrans did open the long ramp that's across from Jack Shell, which they hadn't done in the past. And there's been some mixed reviews, but from our staff, it was a success. It was able to unclog the traffic that was there.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys, for all of this work. All of this work. It's noticeable, it's palatable, and it's a relief for sure. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Councilmember Zabriskie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just have one. Oh, no, don't go away.
I turned the red light off.
Got it. Are you aware of other areas where you're going to have to address traffic flow within your jurisdiction? I mean, you've mentioned North Star and Palisades. On any of the state highways within your jurisdiction, do you see other pinch points, reductions in traffic flow, summer or winter?
So just the winter first. So 267 is obviously the next kind of big task, and that's why we've been meeting with North Star, and Dan and I talk about it frequently. And is it a light timing thing? So right now, we've been working on just this dedicated lane because we went out and we saw that people coming from Kings Beach were tripping the light to turn left in the North Star. It was slowing down the southbound 267 to North Star. So again, just those small 15-second delays, even though the light was quick, backs up that volume. So it seems like the volume has now been pushing a little further south of Schaefer Mill Airport Road here, which is ideal. I was actually in line at North Star, and the guy's like, man, it took an hour and 20 to get here from 80 this morning. I was like, all right. So I was out there next morning, and we're looking at the lights. Then we met with North Star, and they set up these cones now. But the light timing is, it can't be done remotely. It's got to be done. So figuring out what that timing is kind of where we're addressing next. Summertime is obviously 28, Tahoe City. We're looking at, I mean, it's a big volume thing, and I'd like to say we have some great plan, but not yet. I mean, that just comes down to the amount of people, I think, which is a good thing, right, that are coming here. But yeah, if you have any suggestions, I mean,
I'll ask our transportation people.
yeah, but it seems like and then again, that's Placer County and.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any questions? Commander, thank you so much for being here tonight. We're really fortunate to have you. It's so nice to actually meet you. So thank you for coming in, and also to our acting chief as well. Just thank you for the collaborative spirit behind this. I think it's another instance of how we have different agencies collaborating towards common goals and solutions. So thank you both.
Totally. Thank you. Have a good night.
All right. With that, we're going to move on to item 5.3. My understanding is that we are pulling 5.2, the quarterly financial status presentation this evening. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you for that. That was inadvertently put on the agenda. So for town manager's report, take this off very quickly tonight. Just a reminder to the public that we are back in person for our meetings. Our doors are open, regular hours. If you are unvaccinated, we ask that you wear a mask. If you are vaccinated, it is your choice to wear one or not, depending on your comfort level. And that's all I have tonight.
Very efficient, Jen. Thank you. So for discussion items, we do have one more change to the agenda tonight. So we're going to start with item 7.1, and then we're actually going to bump 7.3 up in advance of the bioenergy scoping update. So the bioenergy scoping update will come last. Is that acceptable to all of my fellow council members? Okay, wonderful. So with that, we will start with 7.1, the Truckee Tourism Business Improvement District 2021-22 Annual Report. We'll start with our staff presentation. Hillary, I understand you, and of course we have Colleen Dalton here as well to present on that. We'll come to council questions. When we come to questions, Councilmember Pallavi, I will kick it over to you to start us on questions. But first we'll go through the staff presentation. So Hillary, I'll turn it over to you and Colleen.
All
right, good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the public. Our next item is an annual report for the Truckee Tourism Business Improvement District, or TBID. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce Colleen Dalton, CEO of Visit Truckee Tahoe, to walk us through their report. But before I do that, I want to provide some brief context and background on what a TBID is and what Council's role is tonight. A TBID is a self-assessment of hotels and short-term rental lodging properties in Truckee. It was renewed in the fall of 2020 for a second term, and that term will run through 2025. A business improvement district is governed by a specific California Business Improvement District law, which provides limits on how funds can be used and governs how the district is formed and provides your council with specific authority over the TBID. So what's the difference between a TBID and TOT, or transient occupancy tax, is one question we often receive. A TBID, again, is a self-assessment, meaning it's voted in by the lodging business owners, including all hotels, bed and breakfast, and short-term rentals in Truckee. The funds are collected by the town and passed through to an owners association, which in this case is Visit Truckee Tahoe. The funds, the use of those funds is restricted by law to specific purposes that must provide a special benefit to the assessed properties. So it's not a fund for mitigation for tourism. The current assessment rate is 1.25% of gross lodging revenue. TOT, on the other hand, is approved by Truckee voters and is a tax. These funds contribute to the town's general fund and help pay a visitor's share of the cost of government services that benefit everyone in town, such as police services and snow plowing. Residents pay for their portion of these services through property taxes. The TOT rate was 10% until January 1st, 2021, when Measure K increased the rate to 12% in order to fund additional community priorities, including housing, emergency preparedness, and open space preservation. Your council plays an important role in the governance of the TBID. The TBID assessment is collected through the town's tax collecting authority, and council approval was required for the formation as well as the renewal of the TBID. Council approves the management district plan, which is the plan that sets out the parameters under which those funds can be spent, and council approval would be required for any changes to that plan. And every year, the Owners Association is required to submit an annual report to council for approval. Council may approve the report as submitted or initiate a process, including notification of assessed properties, a hearing, and a resolution to make any modifications to that plan if you so choose. So with that, our recommendation tonight is to receive an update presentation from Visit Truckee Tahoe and to approve the 2021-2022 TBID annual report from VTT. So that I'd like to introduce Colleen Dalton, CEO of Visit Truckee Tahoe.
Thank you, Hillary. And thank you, police, for keeping us out of the national news, unlike other mountain towns for their traffic. All right, so good evening, Mayor Henderson, Vice Mayor Romack, and fellow council members. Let's see how we can get through a very big presentation. All right, so here's our agenda tonight. Who we are, what we do, mission, partners, the economic impact of lodging particularly, our budget, and then our promotion and stewardship plan, and then, more importantly, where we're going and what's that story. Hillary covered quite a bit of this, but we are the Homeowners Association, also a tourism authority formed only a year and a half ago. We are a 501c6D destination marketing and management organization with 1 3/4 staff, 5 to 7 member board of directors, and a town of Truckee seat, Dave Pollovy. And Hillary covered the rest there. Our current board of directors are our Chair Winterberger. We have an open seat, Melanie Maharshan, Dave Pollovy, Shelley Braden, myself, and Shaban on staff. And our mission is to promote, protect, and enhance Truckee as an authentic mountain town. We serve our lodging business members, partner with key organizations, and balance our actions for the well-being of our community. So we have a small but mighty board and staff, and we couldn't do what we do without incredible partnerships in our first year and a half. This isn't all of them, but these are perhaps our closest partners. They are our partners, and we advocate for a lot of their work that underscores our mission. We happened to get together last December. It was strange. We sort of wore masks. We had a rose ceremony like the Bachelor show. It was wonderful. Not sure what we'll do next year. It might be The Price is Right or Dating Game. But that was fun. And but most importantly, we got to connect. And you'll see the ski areas here, Placer County, Truckee Trails Foundation, U.S. Forest Service, county council members. Really critical that we have a trustworthy partnership, and we're well on that road. So it's always good to remember the economic impact of Truckee's lodging sector and the things that we do and help pay the TOT General Fund. And with that increase in the TOT, we did get up to $4.9 million in TOT for town revenue to do such a good job. The industry as a whole, we did a study a few years ago. The tourism industry as a whole, so sales tax, TBID, TOT, gross revenue, drove $159 million into the local economy in a normal calendar year, according to our Dean Bunyan study, same firm that Visit California uses. And we're doing that again this year. We're going to refresh that. So here we are with the TOT. So we're here tonight to approve basically this slide, which is the category dictated by the Management District Plan. There are 4 categories per se. All of these details were in your packet tonight. Just wanted to point out that this is based on a $35 million gross lodging revenue for the year, the fiscal year. It matches town's estimate. That is conservative. And we wouldn't be surprised if we got up to $45 million in gross lodging revenue, which would then increase town revenue from $4.2 million budgeted to $5.4. So that's a lot to help with all the needs we have in our town. We look at it a little bit differently and structured our budget around what does it cost to run the business. Promotion and communication is under the tourism enhancement category. And just to note that 426 includes all of our communication, all of our stewardship communication, all of our guides to power outages. So it's not just promotion, right? Everything we do is filtered by sustainable messaging. Then we have our actual tangible program services and sponsorships under stewardship, 27%. And then we're required to have our reserves, and we've decided to do that on half a year's worth of operating, basically keeping the lights on. And then we also set aside a prudent reserves for our tourism enhancement management in case of a very rainy day, which we've had before. All right, just to look at the pie chart right here, bottom right 2 pie is where you have that stewardship and promotion. So we've already gone through half the agenda, yay. But this is the fun stuff. So a lot of this was in your report. I'm not going to go through the organization, but we have done a lot of work on that. We continue to work on our strategic plan, our values, our advocacy platform. But I really want to get into our priorities under stewardship and promotion. Quite a long list was in your packet. Hopefully everyone enjoyed going through that. Since we're midway through the year, we had quite a few accomplishments, and we have a lot of things in progress. This is the promotion category, right? So new startup organization, needed to develop a corporate identity, worked with an excellent firm and developed our corporate identity, very important for years to come. We had to distance ourselves from Basecamp for a Big Life too, as you might recall. Then we took the large undertaking of a new website and getting off a very successful Truckee.com to visit TruckeeTahoe.com and distinguishing ourselves as the visitor website. 40% of the primary navigation is nature, history, and sustainability, unlike most towns and cities. And then you'll see a lot of our content is specifically dialed into educating and making new visitors who've never been here, first-timers to old-timers, really be aware of how we expect our behavior here, when you're here, before how you're planning your trip, and when you get here. So I invite you to take a look at the website. This year, so going into some of our other, on the promotion side, again, reminder, communications, everything, all the sustainability messaging is out of that budget, our time and any hard costs. So just a few things here that we highlighted last year: kindness, 36 flavors of campfires not to have. We deciphered that into a matrix and pushed that hard. Last summer, it had to be understandable at 8th grade level. So we worked hard on that, working with all the agencies, Truckee Fire, and we're pretty proud of that work. Then summer, fall, the newsletter is also another channel where we push out communications. You'll see again that is the theme is always sustainability and making sure we use that precious real estate to get those critical messages out. We spent an immense amount of time on guides for preparing for an evacuation and also perhaps a wildfire and understanding wildfire season in Truckee, Tahoe. Siobhan Kenny, who's joined me tonight, our Director of Sustainable Tourism. We've built partnerships with the PUD, and we're on emergency calls and things we never would have done 5 years ago. It is a whole new world. We're really psyched about coming up with the daily Truckee travel alert. We realized that news and information was changing by the minute, and we promoted that, pushed that out. It's a web page, and we're committed to updating that 7 days a week. This winter, we can continue that mantra. You'll see some numbers there in our reach. So we reached 23,000 folks on the left-hand side. That's what fortunately, we can do after being around for 6 years, formerly a committee under the chamber. So it's critically important to increase our reach, scale, and frequency. Those are marketing terms, to get people's brain to start thinking differently. And so when we don't do paid advertising, haven't in 2 years, but you will start to see advertising to encourage people to join our newsletter list, fan or follow us, because there's churn and we need to make sure that we keep those databases big and grow them even bigger. That's how we move the needle. So a few more examples here. Such a pleasure to see positive coverage in the mainstream, national mainstream these days. We had 13 million in negative COVID-related, wildfire-related coverage over the last year. For perspective, prior to that, a big year was 12 million. So a lot. We have a very big black eye. And we're chipping away at that, as the state of California is as well. So this is a pleasant to see. Travel and Leisure was the first national magazine to actually talk to us about sustainability, and we were quoted in there. That was a very big win. Also on the promotional side, super important to, in the consideration set of where to go for your travel destination experience, to have a place to capture them, and we call that a booking engine, and that will be skinned in our new look feel, but more importantly, we'll be offering incentives and value adds that reinforce the sustainable Truckee messaging, unlike the dozens of other websites selling lodging. All right, events have really struggled. We're just disappeared from the horizon. They're kind of coming back. So you'll see we've committed to a few only in the shoulder season. We do not sponsor events in the peak period. We're looking at the Barracuda perhaps for large media coverage based on the premier golf destination we have here. So we'll see about that. Now the fun stuff. On the stewardship side, we did include in your packet a link to our very lengthy application for a prestigious award with the state of California. This is a list of all those items. One of the first things we did intuitively was develop the Sustainable Truckee Initiative brand and identity. We didn't think the community wanted to hear visit Truckee, Tahoe as a call to action right out of the gate. Very, very important to put our face forward of what we're here to do, and that is to build towards a sustainable Truckee. There's a little bit of explanation there. And all of the programs and sponsorships are listed here. That's on the website for you to peruse. And I'm just going to whip through here some of the highlights. one thing that I emphasized recently in a panel talk was everything we do, how can we do it in a sustainable context or filter? And if you're going to do a community gift card, let's match that with 25% stewardship programs for the full card value. And we're pretty excited about that. So we got up to $14K in total card value. That's $3,500 more set aside for stewardship. And that could be to meadow restoration in Truckee or adjacent to Truckee. And the community might decide that. We'll have to see about that. We also met with Sierra Business Council on the Green Business Certification. There was a gap we identified in actually achieving that vision, and we're going to see where that goes and see how we can help with restaurants, retail, and lodging, more tourism-focused small businesses, and how can they operate more sustainably. We were very pleased to be invited by the editor of Moonshine to write pretty long format editorials on the new world order for tourism and flipping that model. Sierra Sun has been good to us in publishing all of our press releases, and we're very lucky to have the front page bottom strip to promote the Truckee Travel Alert. So some of our stewardship budget on that side, remember I said programs, services, and sponsorships? So here's an example of a sponsorship. We sponsored the Ridgeline Nature Loop through the Truckee Trails Foundation. It is ADA accessible, and this is the ribbon cutting, and we're really excited about that. So we helped close that gap on that funding gap. We just recently helped fund the Tahoe Backcountry Alliance to clear extensively more parking spots at West End. A good thing last winter turned into a snow play, so we chipped in and look at that gorgeous, all those parking spots, and lo and behold, a snow play area really got a lot of coverage, and Parks districts really stepped up and helped with the porta potty placement and also the trash cleanup. So this was a three-way effort, and we really appreciate that. So you've probably heard about our summer trail host last summer. We got a lot of great PR out of that, and a lot of learnings and takeaways. And a lot of they discovered a lot of things out there. They assisted everyone from offering Band-Aids to water to educating about banana peels don't belong in the woods. And they did discover 6 illegal fire rings, right? So remember how tense those times were. We were all just nerve-wracked by it all. So we will maybe even go bigger next summer, and we're so proud of our partnership with TTF on that. We're in the midst of our winter trail access hosts, and some big lessons are happening right now. There is a significant trash and lack of porta potty infrastructure in and very close to Truckee. This is a systemic, big capital investment challenge for our town. And I'll go into that a little bit later. And a golden opportunity, unexpected consequence, we were approached to, hey, do you need more official snow parks? So in all those emails and conversations and phone calls to find solutions to overfilling trash bins, because we don't want Truckee to be remembered that way, we had a golden opportunity, and we're going to pursue that. This is at your leisure, and you'll have this PowerPoint after this, is just some of the texts and emails that sort of flew around the last week or so. But it was just kind of like that, Laurel and Hardy, who's on first, sort of, comedy in that everyone, who's got the bins up, where are the porta potties? Oh, they're up there. So it just took our boots on the ground to really see what was happening between the porta potties and the trash. So I guess this is a small thing, but it's a big thing, right? This is the canary in the coal mine. We have to catch up with population growth, residency growth, higher visitation. We have some challenges ahead. Along with those programs, we put out quite a few summer then winter signage, 2 versions of the winter signage for backcountry, more experienced folks, and then your newer snowplay users. And interesting note on the summer signage, we QR codes, scan for your digital map or your, where else to go. Summer we had 281 in the first 5 months, and in the first 5 weeks, Siobhan, it's a 290. So it looks like folks need information on the weather forecast, the avalanche safety. So these are allowable for us by the U.S. Forest Service as a temporary emergency placement. These aren't permanent. A permanent solution, again, is another capital 5-10 year planning. And how do we do that together? This is the Truckee Travel Alert, quite a few page views. We also sort of chipped away and worked hard on a vision for a digital recreation map that had the goals of education. Where are the legit parking spots? How do I stay safe? Where can I go hire a guide or get a water bottle? Supporting our small local businesses, and we teamed up with some really great GPS developers to do this. These filters here are on for our paved paths, looks like small businesses and emergency services. This view is the filter on for snow play. And then, of course, our flagpole banners downtown, again, those are just another way of getting literally hundreds of thousands of impressions as folks walk by or drive through of to take care. We did launch a Local Voices Making Climate Choices opportunity for anyone to upload their photo of what they do. And you might see some of our locals here. And then the pledges. We teamed up with our folks on the lake, NLTRA, and Take Care and Tahoe Fund on the traveler pledges over the last few years. And love volunteerism opportunities and ideas, and that we could do a better job with helping folks know when to do that. Hawaii does a great job with volunteerism, like Wednesdays at 10, you meet at this beach. So if we make it easy and consistent, I don't see why truly sustainably minded travelers wouldn't add that to their stay here. Great for the kids. So the other, remember, program services and sponsorships. We can never donate. We have to have, it has to be a quid pro quo. That's per our district plan, that highways code. So we sponsor. Right now, we were very involved in Alfred's work on the e-bike share. We love that project and are excited about that. There's some branding opportunities down the road with that. Working with Alfred and Microtransit, excited about that opportunity and rising to the occasion of being a Whistler or being an NLTRA. So that really helps our town move folks. We've been requested to take a look at the airport shuttle, maybe a bike valet this summer. So transportation, kind of big. Access and inclusion, opportunity to perhaps sponsor Cabin Creek parking. That's become very, very challenging. And then I'm in talks with Allison about, we want to do a beginner's trail, but hey, what if we made it adaptive? And what if we really rose to the occasion of being inclusive and equitable in our town and build a world-class adaptive trail? So we're actually looking at the cost thereof with a state-of-the-art designer. All right, we're almost done. So, where are we going? I think we all know that we are in a time of serious transformation for global tourism. Venice is now charging a fee to enter the city. They consider the city a museum. This is major, you guys. We just got back from the Visit California conference this week. So, needless to say, the community needs to be front and center. We have to have an accelerated climate action plan. It is happening now. And we have a lot of things we've done. There is urgency to the solution. So wanted to make you aware that over on the lake, we're very proud to be asked to join the table of a Tahoe Future of Tourism large RFP that was spearheaded by TRPA, our friends at TRPA. This was, I want to say 300 hours of work, 7 months, 80 firms, consultant stewardship firms, mind you, and international ones were invited to respond to solve our challenges of Lake Tahoe, including Truckee. This was the Tahoe Truckee selection process. So it did boil down to CREST, the Center for Responsible Tourism. They're an excellent choice. The second one was Future IQ. Already had a meeting last week. I'm coming off the heels of Visit California. I joined, you see Joanne Orquetta of TRPA, Andy Chapman, Amy Berry of the Tahoe Fund, tippy top folks from the U.S. Forest Service. The list on your right really shows the cross-section of agencies and districts and counties and states represented here. It is a big, hairy, audacious project. That is why we know that we had to do our own highly driven by an expert consultant firm Truckee roadmap to sustainability and tourism management, focused on Truckee. So let's take a look at this. Remember, the Tahoe effort is really more about recreation and environment, but sustainability is much broader than that. It's actually about community and culture and well-being, inclusivity. What's our economic vitality? Is that at stake? So here, I just wanted to make sure what we all understand is that this is steered by a Truckee Stewardship Council, if you will, something similar to the Mountain Housing Council. This is an agnostic council. This is not a Visit Truckee Tahoe tourism thing. This is a leadership council with our peers to help get us to a vision of sustainability. It's geographically, really, the hub is Truckee, but people's perception of Truckee goes up to the summit, out to Hirschdale, and down 89, and out to the ski areas as well. So this integrates all of our local agencies, districts, and counties. We bring together all of the master plans and the leadership. We rely deeply upon citizen input, and it's facilitated by a stewardship consultant, and all we do, VTT, is handle the facilitation and administration, and we fund the consultant. We are really seeking to be behind the scenes. So it's good to, in your mind, think about these 4 areas as truly what we're striving for as to become a sustainable Truckee. So there is something called the Mountain Ideals Standard. It's a GSTC, Global Sustainable Tourism Council, recognized special certification for mountain towns. And lo and behold, there are only 3 mountain towns in the United States that have achieved this certification. And this is not a one-stop, set it and forget it. This is achieving something, then monitoring, measuring, and making sure you're living up to that certification on a biannual basis. So the council's role is really to accelerate community-wide action by uniting stakeholders around a common ambitious goal, creating a platform for collaboration, inclusiveness, and speed. One thing we are incredibly grateful for is what Supervisor Hardy Bullock has done, which is to create the CCC, which is truly the runway for the Stewardship Council, immediately addressing peak period visitation challenges at hand last summer. And you'll see the list of folks here is most likely those who will be participating in the Stewardship Council. Let's take a look at this roadmap. This looks familiar, like the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, the quality improvement cycle. So if we have a vision, what's the structure, what's the plan, what are we striving for, and then how do we measure, improve, and continue that cycle? This is a rather detailed slide. I won't go into too much depth here, but VTT, the board and staff, and our VIP partners, we spent a lot of time getting to where we are today. We've actually done a pre-audit of certification, found the gaps. We really worked on our partnerships to build that trust. So where we are now was actually hiring our own sustainable stewardship consultant to really facilitate cutting-edge methodology of that council. We're looking at a length of approximately next winter to get this all accomplished. And then forever, the council, the plan, and the certification. So it might surprise you to know that in our audit, there are many things and many important strategies, Keep Truckee Green, the River Watershed Council, that are already in play addressing some of our sustainable town issues. So if we were to look at town council's goals, these stars highlight where the council's goals land on this map. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. In Park City, they had a community sustainable visioning process, and they had a slightly different take on what their priorities should be. So if we lay the map for them, you'll see their stars on other areas of the sustainability certification. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. Every town is incredibly unique. So we decided to create this graphic to help visualize all of these incredibly strong, good efforts, smart people, and getting us all united in one direction. So the Visit Truckee Tahoe board, actually, week before last, has decided to hire Future IQ as our stewardship consultant. Remember, they were the runner-up out of 80 consultants considered or invited to the table on the lake. We're really excited about working with these guys, and blessed that they actually had bandwidth to take on our project. You'll see they're very people-focused, which we like, and what I really particularly liked was they're data-driven and very graphics-oriented. I just love pictures, if you couldn't tell, and just to help communicate and to listen and inform. So are we on the right path? Let's see. So last week, we were invited, the only destination marketing and management organization in the state of California, to speak at a panel on sustainability. Who's doing it right? So it was really in front of, I think it was about 700 folks in the ballroom in the Hilton in San Francisco last week. We had our time to shine. And I couldn't have been more honored to speak about Truckee in front of these folks. And we got a lot of very positive, enthusiastic feedback. High fives, kisses on the lips by people I don't know. It was quite validating, right? So we're very honored about that. And the next day, the Visit California board actually had a workshop, and they included one of our key questions and challenges for them, one of the 5 questions, which is, are there marketing regions, how they sort of structure California? They have the coast and the mountains. Do they work for sustainability? And our challenge to them was they don't. And we're challenging the Visit California to consider restructuring the model. It doesn't work for mountain towns. So we rattled the cage a little bit, and we're super excited to see all these tables of very smart C-suite tourism executives hunkering down, figuring out what our priorities were. And last but not least, we did apply for the award, and we won. We tied with Bear, and that was super exciting. There were 22 applications. I'm not an award fan. This is not about getting awards. This is about validation, right? So we couldn't have been more honored to be in front of our peers a year and a half after being formed as an organization. And on that note, Hillary, would you like to play the video?
Truckee. We are community. Protectors of the outdoors. Committed to climate. Stewards of nature. Believers in people. Welcome.
And that's all I got.
Colleen, that was incredible. I feel like I remember first talking to you about this when you were just getting going, and I guess I was campaigning at that point. And to see everything that has happened over such a short period of time, I mean, it is truly phenomenal. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing. It's really incredible. I have other things to say, but I'll open it to my fellow council members, and I'm very grateful for your work. And let's turn to council questions. Councilmember Pallavi, do you have any?
I don't have any questions. I get to work with both Siobhan and Colleen on a regular basis. And all I would really add to that great presentation is, as you can tell through Colleen's slides right there, information is her strong suit, and providing that in a way that we work through it has just been really incredible. So to see all of the work that's been done with 1 and 3/4, even though Siobhan's really a full person, however we classify her, is pretty incredible. And I've enjoyed being a part of it. And I know I don't have any questions because I work with them all the time. So it's fun.
I know you do. All right, fair enough. Vice Mayor Romack, do you have any questions?
My only question was going to be what Councilmember Pallavi said is, how do you do all this with 1 3/4 of a person? It's really impressive to what the mayor was just saying. So thank you for, what you're doing. No other questions.
It's our partners. It's truly our partners, and we work hard.
You certainly do. Councilmember Klofstad, do you have any questions?
I do have a couple, and thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to see the evolution and the gains that you guys have made in such a short period of time. And I have to say, the adaptive trail, just, I didn't know that, so thank you. That's pretty amazing. Going back to the Tahoe Truckee effort with Crest, is Visit Truckee Tahoe the representation of Truckee, or do we have other agencies involved?
Right now, it's just Visit Truckee Tahoe that participated. We chipped in on funding. I'm sure they would accept more funding and another seat at the table. I do believe there's opportunity.
They come hand in hand.
Yes.
Yeah.
I honestly will say I do believe we would have been invited to the table even without funding, because of everything we've been through together the last 2 years and developing incredible relationships. And we've offered to help in so many ways at South Lake and North Lake and with the counties that I don't think it was contingent upon that. And there's a bit of a gap to fill with that. And so we have to raise some more funds to complete that RFP. But yeah, I would say that would help.
Yeah, and especially after the first presentation about the changes with CHP and our force. And that is really due to things happening outside of the town of Truckee. But the impacts are here in the town of Truckee, both in travel going to and from North Star, as well as travel going to and from Palisades and Alpine and Tahoe City and around the lake. So I think it would be really important that those impacts are represented and to the best of our ability mitigated, because of course those greenhouse gases, those bathroom stops, that trash on the side of the road, it's happening here as people are going there. So I would really love to see that, and in particular because I live on Donner Lake and I see those stopovers. Maybe they're going to one of the ski resorts or going to Lake Tahoe, but they're going to stop in Donner Lake and spread their legs and take care of business. So I'd really love to see some way of, I loved how you have the map showing where the snow play is. I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to either expand some of that trash and restroom service, or maybe signage directing people to where those appropriate places are. We just created a parking lot with the trash bin and porta potties on Westlake. And then we have some access to State Park, but not always. And then we have everything in between. So that's just kind of a plant a seed on my wish list, along with that adaptive trail. So, and I really do hope that this is more commentary. I just really hope that we can expand the Trail Host program. I had such positive feedback from the community on that and from visitors. So that was, I think, hugely successful. So
well, I have a big, hairy, audacious idea about the hosts, and that it goes beyond trails and trail hosts, that it's truly Truckee hosts. When I was in the city, I was struck by very well-branded and groomed and uniformed men and women, that it was San Francisco host, and it was bigger. And I'm struck by that and how welcoming they made us feel. And is that something that would be of interest?
The ski resorts do this very successfully.
Yeah, exactly.
We should learn from that.
In their bubble. And so what would it look like for Truckee to have, folks remember, the one thing they remember is how welcome they felt and how friendly people were. That's what they take away. So if they are, they look confused, standing on a corner, and up walks the host, and we've assisted them with whatever that is, or your bathroom's down there half mile, or hey, did you need an extra doggy poop bag? Wouldn't that be amazing? And there could be some branding opportunities with that if we really got behind it. And the ideas are endless.
Yeah, I've noticed that if you actually just ask that question, I have an extra dog poop bag, if you need it, rather than, hey, did you know you're supposed to pick up? It's much more effective that way. So things like that.
Right.
And helping our locals educate and support our tourists in acting like a local. respecting Truckee like a local. I think you guys are doing a great job of getting that message out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Zabriskie, any questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Colleen. That was an excellent presentation. I wanted to understand again, I think you explained, but if you could just do it one more time, how will the stewardship group be separate from the promotional group or the other part of Visit Tahoe Truckee?
So that's a very good question, actually, and they aren't separate groups of people. It's really how we've structured the budget. So in our district plan, we have what's called a tourism enhancement category, and we've defined underneath that these two sort of general areas of stewardship and sustainability: programs, services, and sponsorships. So we're writing checks, right? And then we have promotion, which is all of our communication. So all the newsletters, the social media, the events we're looking at, the booking engine we're looking at. It's just, Jan, a way for us to just organize and structure the funds under these two pillars of our responsibility. That's really what it boils down to. Okay. Does that help?
That helps. When I look through the staff presentation, the material from your group that was submitted, I see the tension between promoting overnight stays, promoting purchases at local retailers and restaurants. I see the tension between that and then trying to achieve a sustainable form of tourism, just recognizing that the more people we have, the greater the impacts on our natural environment, which strikes me as the environment being our economic, really that's our economic base, much more than our built environment. So I'm really excited by all the things you described this evening. I like seeing a stewardship group operating separately because of the tension with trying to maximize revenues. And the thing that concerns me is I feel right now what is occurring is an attempt to mitigate but not overcome the increasing environmental degradation. And I hope your organization is working towards actually achieving the elimination of further environmental degradation as a function of human impact. And when I think about that, for me, the most important things which you're starting to work on, I noticed that in connection with Donner Lake, is the water quality of our lakes, streams, and meadows. And you mentioned meadows this evening. I'm hoping, despite all that the Watershed Council is doing, that Visit Tahoe Truckee, Visit Truckee Tahoe, yes, I need to get that right. At least it's not a base camp. That as long as, despite all their efforts, I can see how you can help along those lines. That volunteerism, I've seen that work in other countries. I can see it working here as well. I hope that does work out and you're putting as much effort into that as you can, and some of that goes into water quality along with other efforts at water quality. And focus on the natural environment. I think you're headed in the right direction. You're doing more than what I thought 3 months ago. I'm greatly encouraged.
We hope so. And just to make sure we're all on the same page here, the Truckee Stewardship Council will really, through the help of the consultant and through immense citizen engagement, decide the priorities for our town. For example, a sustainable BREC is actually a local government-driven initiative that followed that same methodology that came up with 4 priorities. And one of those was boots and bikes, right? So we really offer it to the community. We're funding this, but it's not ours. We are offering this as a method, a mechanism for the community to come together, stakeholders such as everyone in this room, to help us decide what are those 4 priorities. Is it water? Is it diversity, equity, inclusion? Is it climate? Is it climate and greenhouse gases? We have a different style here. So it's a structure with a proven framework, Mountain Ideal Standard, approved by the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, the global, that already proven by 3 mountain towns. So we're very fortunate that they were that innovative before us, and we're not laying this new groundwork. So we're going to hang our hats on that. Are there other certifications and frameworks? Sure. This one seems to be right in front of us, and I do have to give credit to Patty Baird, our former board member, for spending hundreds of hours researching this while we were forming our organization.
And I think I would also add to that, Councilmember Zabriskie, I've been on this board for just over 3 years now. When I first joined, we spoke a lot about pay-per-click and Expedia and things like that, and it very much was a different environment. It was very much about how can we attract different types of visitors? How can we attract shoulder season visitors? Since COVID, this board hasn't spent a dime, and I don't think Colleen quite pointed it out as prevalently as she should have. There has not been a dime spent on actual promotion of Truckee. We haven't actually tried to bring more people here. Unfortunately, or fortunately for some, I appear on a lot of Chronicle articles, and Colleen gets quoted left and right, and Braun does an amazing job of kind of bringing all of that together. So we've sort of just been here and done that, and our tourism impacts have really come along quite naturally, for better or for worse, and our tourism revenue and all of those things, and so to Patty's credit, to Colleen's credit, to this board's credit, that shift that really happened when we renewed the T-bid in 2020 was very cognizant of that concept. And I think, we use tourism language, and, Colleen uses promotions and communication in a way that sometimes I think might have a negative connotation to certain folks, and especially in our community. I think a great way to talk about it is really a lot of the work that goes into messaging. And that was something that I'm really happy to see our PIO, our Visit Truckee, our chamber finally, after years and years of really not being on the same page, the amount of cooperation and sort of elevating the messages that need to be sent out, in my opinion, is at an all-time high, and that's just been incredibly successful for some of the success that we've seen in getting some of this mitigation out there. So I just want to be really clear as to those different buckets, because I think it's important. And the Truckee Stewardship Council is sort of the next step, right? It's sort of the evolution of Supervisor Bullock's CCC group, which I don't know if it's going to stay or what's really happening there, but it's sort of all kind of moving in the same direction in an effort to really address, what do we think is important from up here, from a dais perspective, and where do we have money to invest? But what we really haven't done yet in this community, in my tenure, my 20 years here, is we haven't really listened to the community and what their hopes, fears, desires, all of that as it relates to tourism, right? We only hear the negative, I think, is at least from our perspective, and what the Truckee Stewardship Council's goal can really be is to both highlight the positive, listen to the negative, and figure out what's the path forward for how tourism occurs, both within and in surrounding Truckee. And I think it's needed, and it's going to be a good tool to actually do some of those things. So I hope that helps answer.
It does, because I have the same sense, and it's no longer build it and they will come. It's protect it and they will come. That's what.
Unfortunately, right? Like that's part of the conundrum that we're now working within. So we're winning great awards, right? Kudos to them. That's awesome. We're going to be on the cutting edge of a new kind of tourism. That might bring more people, and then how do we deal with it, right? So it's the right people. Well, the right people, the wrong people. Then we get into all those types of conversations. So it's a really interesting topic, and we'll have some seats on the Truckee Stewardship Council for you.
Yeah, and I hear Colleen saying that, okay, we're trying to attract the right people, but we're going to get people that we may not have attracted, and what we're going to try to do is educate them. to the idea of sustainability and
Yes, and make it
What it-
easy, provide the infrastructure for them to do the right thing.
Yeah. I want to ask just a small question, not these grand ideas. I didn't see, on transportation, I didn't see anything specific about moving people to trailheads, transporting people to trailheads. Was that something that had been discussed, or was that left out deliberately?
Not other than the microtransit that Alfred's working on, that perhaps would incorporate some of that. I'm not aware of us moving to trailhead-specific project.
Yeah, because that's already an issue. I see that as an issue down the line. People coming here in the private automobiles, they all drive.
Yep, park and shuttle to trailheads. It's a great idea. Let's
We're there. Phase 2 of the microtransit project is definitely going to include that, right, Mr. Wilkins? Yeah, totally.
perfect.
Well, I wonder what, yeah, so I'm hoping visit.
That's why you got to go to Dan, but you know.
Maybe we will.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, Colleen, thank you so much. I think if there are no other questions from council, I will open public comment. Do we have anyone who would like to make a public comment this evening? No. Okay, seeing none, I will close public comment. And is there anything else related to deliberation that you would like to say? Councilmember Pallavi, I'll turn back to you.
No, thank you. Great job, and proud to serve on the board. And any lodging proprietors out there, we do have a few openings on our board. We've had a really, really amazingly strong board for my entire tenure, and we have just had a number of resignations for a variety of reasons. So we do have some opportunities if we have any lodging providers in any sector. I believe we do have opportunity for whether you're a hotel or short-term renter or property manager. We do have seats for all of those available at the moment. So step on up.
That's great to know. Thank you. Vice Mayor Romack?
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you again for all the hard work. And to Councilmember Zabriskie, this education, promotion, communication, the signs at trailheads that you've put up, I think are phenomenal. And speak to, we may not always attract the type of people we're thinking would be the best stewards of our environment, but this helps teach people what to do and how to do it correctly. So I want to commend you, because every time I see one, I get excited, like, all right, good job. Also, the Sustainable Truckee gift card. I am one of the 209 folks that have received one. I haven't spent it yet, but it's fantastic to just read through the list of restaurants or stores that you can utilize the gift certificate at. So I would encourage folks who are listening or watching, it's a great gift. And then finally, I just wanted to add, I was very excited to see transportation part of, moving forward. And I'm so excited that VTT is working with the town on potentially microtransit, bike share, the airport shuttle. We have to move people around. And again, that way, if we're attracting a lot of tourists, if we can get them out of their car, they're going to have less of an impact when they're here. So just really excited that VTT is stepping up and participating in these discussions as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Klofstad.
Yeah, just a couple things. Thank you for bringing up Patty. I do want to just give her a shout out. I know she has spent an enormous amount of time and energy on this, and I'm excited for her retirement, but sad that she's not doing this anymore. And congratulations on the award. That's fantastic. It sounds like we like the direction you're going in, and the thing that I'm most excited about is the opportunity to get feedback from the community and what their priorities are. I think that last piece that you just talked about, what Breck did might not be what we focus on. Really, really important for our community to hear, because this is our sustainable tourism plan. It's not somebody else's. It's not the tourists that are coming here. This is supposed to be what we, as a community, want to see for our community. So that, I just feel like I wanted to underscore it. Thank you very much for highlighting that tonight. And then I have one last question is, what do you need from us in order to be successful on this very vast endeavor?
Well, I'll tell a quick story. on my way to San Francisco, I listened to a lot of NPR, and they're interviewing folks that worked for Public Works. The manhole covers the water drainage under the city. You might remember the story. And they were talking about their plans for capital structure changes to handle climate change now, because it's warming up so much that the precipitation is going to be longer and more rain. Longer and more rain is happening now. So we wouldn't want visitors walking around Union Square in knee-deep water, right? So I reminded the audience of this. So what we would ask for is truly thinking deeply about capital infrastructure needed not only now, but 5-10 years from now for climate change. And the Climate Action Plan, I think, is our roadmap to that. Love everything else we do, and money's tight, but these toilets and trash are not glamorous, fun, or pretty, but those are the basics before we get to all the other pretty stuff in town. So that was my message in front of the audience, and that's what we ask of this government.
Very well, thank you.
Councilmember Zabriskie.
Thank you very much, Colleen. Thank you to Jim Winterberger and the rest of your group, and Councilmember Pallavi as well, for how much you've already accomplished. That's all I have.
Okay. Well, I'll also just reiterate, I'm so grateful for your work. I think that these are issues that they're facing our community in really very real ways. And right now, many of you probably heard, Apocalypse Creep, which was a podcast that just aired last week. It featured Truckee as one of the places where climate's deeply impacting our way of living and truly our identity as a community. Just today, I was speaking with one of our downtown merchants about the challenges they're facing related to trash. I know that I and many of us pick up, broken sleds at the Trout Creek Trail and other places all the time. So I just think the work that you're doing to truly make us a model for sustainability is incredible. I am very grateful to both of you for all of your work and to all of Patty's work coming forward as well. So with that, I feel like we have a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around this, and we are probably ready for a motion related to approving the annual report. Do I have anyone who would like to make a motion?
I move we approve the 2021-2022 TTB bid annual report.
And I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And we are unanimous in that. Thank you again for being here tonight. Okay, with that, we are going to move, so again, we're flipping order a little bit. We're going to move to 7.3, which is our notification of intent to comply with SB 1383. And I will turn it over to staff for a brief presentation on this item.
Good evening, Council. I'm eager to take that excitement into our notification of intent to comply for SB 1383. So that's what I'll be presenting on. So I'm going to remind you first what SB 1383 is and what we've been doing to comply with this state law. And then I'm going to talk about the challenges we've been facing, and then that will bring in the notification of intent to comply. So as a reminder, Senate Bill 1383 is focusing on keeping organic waste out of our landfills. Organic waste is the largest waste stream in California. And when organic waste breaks down in our landfills, it emits methane. Our landfills emit 20% of the state's methane. And as you are aware, methane is an extremely potent greenhouse gas. It's 25 times as potent as carbon dioxide, and it's what's coined a short-lived climate pollutant because it has a short lifespan of only 12 years in our atmosphere. So the goal here is to curb methane emissions to have an impact on the near-term atmospheric warming potential. So by keeping organic waste out of our landfills, we are reducing methane emissions. So SB 1383 requires jurisdictions to recover or divert organic waste from landfills. So we have residential and commercial organic recycling services provided with our recycling containers and our yard waste services. As a reminder, we do have a high elevation food waste exemption, and this is provided for jurisdictions above 4,500 feet in elevation due to challenges associated with wildlife with collecting food waste. And we're also required to have an enforceable ordinance, which we do. We brought that to you in December, so we now have an updated municipal code to reflect these local requirements for SB 1383. And although we are not required to collect food waste, we are still motivated to keep Truckee's food waste out of landfill. So we've provided dumpsters across town that are wildlife resistant for residents to drop off their food scraps. So since I last presented this to you, we've added 2 more locations. So we now have 3 dumpsters, one here at Town Hall, one at Mountain Hardware on Donner Pass Road, and one at Glenshire General Store. And a reminder to residents, just food scraps are accepted in these dumpsters. And we have partnered with Glenshire General Store to also sell these kitchen compost pails to collect your food scraps in. So you can head over there and pick one of those up. SB 1383 also requires edible food generators to donate their edible food. So we're working with the 5 major grocery stores in town to get these programs in place. I'm happy to report they all are donating all of their edible food. We're just working with them to set up the additional requirements to have contracts in place with the food recovery organizations and make sure they're keeping proper records and reporting their tonnage of food donated. And an update on Feed Truckee, which is a program we're running in partnership with Sierra Community House and Truckee Sourdough. So Keep Truckee Green is recruiting volunteers to transport bread twice a week from Truckee Sourdough to Sierra Community House, and this is their surplus bread that would otherwise be thrown away. Since the program's inception, we've saved almost 20,000 pounds of bread, and this equates to about 1,500 pounds of methane saved. The town under SB 1383 is also required to meet paper procurement requirements. So we updated our procurement policy back in May of last year to reflect these changes. All paper purchases must contain 30% post-consumer recycled content, and the town is actually going a bit extra and purchasing 100% recycled content paper when available. So CalRecycle and the state passed SB 619 last year when realizing that jurisdictions were struggling to comply with the wide range of requirements under SB 1383. So they created this pathway for jurisdictions to apply for a waiver from civil penalties for any violations or any gaps where they aren't able to meet the SB 1383 requirements this year, so 2022. So it's called a notification of intent to comply, and jurisdictions have to apply by March 1st to be waived for penalties for any violations. So that brings us to some of the challenges we've been facing in complying with SB 1383. So our partners at Eastern Regional Landfill are responsible for diverting and recycling materials that are collected in Truckee. And since China stopped taking materials over the last couple years, it's caused some volatility in the recycling markets, paper being one of those markets. So the value for paper has dropped extremely low. Given our location far from port cities, we have to tack on an additional cost to transport that material to recyclers. And given that Eastern Regional Landfill is a very small hauler and has a very low volume of product, our products are less attractive to be sold to recyclers. And the labor market caused by COVID over the last couple of years has tacked on additional costs for sorting products at their facility. So Eastern Regional Landfill was struggling to recycle paper, but I'm happy to report they are again sorting and diverting paper. So they were able to find a new broker about a month ago, and they've now dedicated 2 staff to sorting paper at the facility. So we are back in compliance, which is great news. But we're still recommending that we include this in our notification of intent to comply to cover us for the small portion of the beginning of the year where we weren't recycling paper, and to also cover any challenges that might pop up later in the year. Eastern Regional Landfill is pretty confident that this relationship with the broker will hold true, and they're planning to have a truckload of paper to sell to them by May of this year. So again, they have 2 staff dedicated to sorting paper again. This is costing a lot of extra money because, again, the cost of paper, or rather the value of paper, is not is much lower than what they're putting in to capture paper. So this will be reflected in their gate fees at Eastern Regional Landfill, but it's expected that this we'll see this impact in the following fiscal year rates, for which are residents and commercial generators. That rate will be tacked into the commercial and residential trash rate. The second piece that we are recommending to include in our notification of intent to comply is related to the procurement requirements of SB 1383. So in order to drive the demand for recovered organic waste products, SB 1383 requires that jurisdictions purchase a certain amount of recovered organic waste products according to a jurisdiction's population. So this table here shows Truckee's specific procurement targets, and we can meet our target by purchasing one of these products or through a combination of products. So we could purchase 27,000 gallons of renewable gas, and that would satisfy our procurement target, or we could purchase a combination of different products at a lower number shown here, as long as they all add up to a target and there's a conversion factor that CalRecycle provides. So however, the one piece that is making this difficult for us to comply is that recovered organic waste products must come from a permitted California facility. So as you know, Truckee's location, geography, and climate is a bit unique compared to the rest of the state. And our utility providers purchase electricity and gas from the east of us. So our infrastructure it's much easier to transport energy from the east of us than over the mountain pass to the west of us. So most of our utilities are purchased out of state. We are also in an area where our ground is covered in snow over half the year, so we don't have a lot of use for compost and mulch application. So we are in a bit of a unique situation that makes this piece of the procurement requirement difficult for us. We do purchase over 80,000 gallons of renewable diesel. So we recently switched over our diesel vehicle fleet to renewable diesel. And unfortunately, this comes from overseas. So we aren't able to, this purchase isn't eligible towards our target. We also purchase electricity from the PUD, which the PUD does a fantastic job diversifying their utilities from renewable resources, and about 16% of their electricity comes from biomass. So about 240,000 kilowatt hours of the electricity we purchase annually comes from biomass. But again, unfortunately, this comes from the east, so this facility is in Utah. And like I mentioned, we do purchase mulch. This mulch purchase is eligible towards our procurement target, but again, we don't have a lot of use for mulch or compost applications, so our facilities division does some landscaping annually, but we purchase about 13% of the target. So we aren't able to hit our target solely through mulch purchases. We are in conversation with CalRecycle about this unique situation. They are helping us try to find some creative solutions. The next presentation tonight is on our biomass scoping study. So that may be a potential solution if we're able to site a biomass facility locally. We could procure energy locally from our local green waste feedstock. So yeah, we are in conversations with CalRecycle to find different creative solutions, but we do recommend including this in our notification of intent to comply to cover us for the calendar year 2022. And that concludes the presentation.
Melanie, thank you so much for the thorough presentation, and we certainly are up against some challenges with this one. Let's move to council questions. Councilmember Zabriskie, I'll start over at this end for this one.
No questions.
Okay, Councilmember Klofstad.
Yes, I asked this question in advance, and I'm hoping you can just share some of the information that if we were able to, if California allowed, if you can go back to that previous slide, allowed it to come from outside of California, just our renewable diesel alone would meet the requirement. And there was some discussion, I thought, about having or trying to find a local source for that. Is that something that we are working on, or did I misrepresent that?
Yes, so there are a couple renewable diesel facilities that we're hoping will come online within California in the next couple years. So there is hope. In that case, we will be able to switch providers and meet our target through that purchase.
In the next couple of years, so
Yeah.
not in time for this next
Right.
certification. And neither will the biomass be online for the next certification if we move forward with that. So what are our other options? And, because it doesn't make sense to purchase something that we're not going to use. So do you have some ideas of where CalRecycle is going with how they're going to handle jurisdictions like us? And I imagine South Lake Tahoe is in the same boat.
Yeah, CalRecycle did indicate there's other jurisdictions on the border that are having this same problem. So we are waiting to hear back from their procurement-specific team to see what their solutions might be. An idea is to purchase compost to give out to the community for people to use in their own homes. I don't know if we could hit the target here. That would be a lot of compost. And again, the facility we send our materials to is also in Nevada. So our compost facility is out of state. So we would have to purchase compost from a different facility that we already have a partnership with. So,
yeah, I have some. What about if, say, Truckee Downer Parks and Rec were to purchase compost? Now, they are a separate agency, but it would be in our jurisdiction. Would that be able to help us satisfy this?
Yeah, great question. So we can hit the target if we are contracting with a service provider who is procuring organic waste products. So I don't know that we have any contracts with the Rec and Park District necessarily. That's something we could look into, but that is an option for a contract service provider to purchase the materials, and we would get the credit.
I imagine they use a lot more mulch and compost than the town of Truckee does. Okay, last question. Heat from renewable natural gas. I asked a question about this as well. What percentage of renewable natural gas would we need to receive from the Southwest Gas Pipeline in order to, on just that, if you take out the mulch that we're already purchasing, so just to reach our requirement with renewable gas?
Yeah, I think it was about 30% of our natural gas we purchase would have to be renewable to hit this 28,000 therms target.
And it would have to be procured from within California.
And it would have to come from within California, yeah.
Right. It's really fun. Thank you. That's it.
Good questions. Vice Mayor Romack, do you have any questions this evening?
Do we have a sense of what the penalties are for, I know we're going to, if we take this action, we're filing the notification of intent to comply, but it sounds like there are still quite a few barriers, and maybe we're going to have this conversation again next year. If the rules aren't changed, what are the penalties? I'm just curious.
So there is a whole compliance process laid out for SB 1383. I believe it starts with a notice of violation, and there's a report the jurisdiction has to bring forward explaining how they're going to comply. And I think the compliance process is mostly set up for jurisdictions who are just not meeting the requirements not because of their hands are tied, like a situation like this. So we've been in conversation with CalRecycle, and they're aware of the situation. So I'm confident that we'll be able to find a solution and not have to go through the whole compliance process. But there is a whole process laid out, and it's a multi-year process. They allow a lot of time for a jurisdiction to fill the gap.
Got it. So yeah, keep trying. And then maybe a positive question. I really liked in the discussion of the Truckee Sourdough Sierra Community House how much methane we're saving. Do we have a sense with our new compost bins in Glenshire and at Mountain Hardware how much additional food waste we're keeping out of the landfill and what benefit we're seeing from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So TTSD is only tracking data on the whole food waste route. So we don't have specific data on each dumpster. And that route also includes Placer County and their food waste program. So we can certainly look at the overall difference and see if there's an impact since we've added the dumpsters, but we don't have any specific information on those specific collections.
Thank you.
That Glenshire dumpster is full like all the time. It's shocking how full. I mean, I used to bring my compost here, and that Glenshire dumpster is like, I feel like churning faster or equal to this one at this point, just anecdotally. I have no other questions, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any additional questions either. So with that, I will open public comment, and seeing that we do not have any members of the public here with us this evening, I will go ahead and close public comment, and we will move right into deliberation. Councilmember Zabriskie, do you have anything additionally for deliberation?
No.
Thank you. Councilmember Klostad.
I just want to thank you very much for all of your work on this. Incredibly complex, and we're doing all the right things. We're surpassing these requirements. It's just not from within the boundaries of California. So I just want to recognize that the town of Truckee really is exemplary in how we're looking at things. The renewable diesel being a great example. It was such a simple changeover and yet has such a huge impact. So I'm really proud of this, even though we have to do a notice of intent to comply. I'm really proud of what we've done, and I hope that we can find some local California resources and or help CalRecycle understand that we are doing the right thing and we should get credit for that. So thank you.
Vice Mayor Romack.
No further comments. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, I think the only thing I want to add to especially Councilmember Klostad's statement is, to me, this sort of screams for an update to our legislative advocacy platform more than anything. This is like such a clear bullet that needs to be added to everything we advocate for, and EJA just needs to be like super whether it's housing, whether it's solar panels, whether it's this one. I mean, we're constantly seeing these exemptions, and it just seems like, man, we'd be saving ourselves a whole lot of time and effort if some of this stuff was figured out first instead of having to always go back to the drawing table, which seems like we're just churning our wheels and spending so much staff time dealing with these things that we're actually doing, but don't hit the way the legislation's been formed. So that's my takeaway from this whole thing. Other than that, I'll make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2022-08, authorizing the town to apply for a notification of intent with SB 1383.
Second.
Wonderful. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, we are unanimous. Thank you, everyone, for that. Thank you, Melanie and team, for all of your work on this challenging one. So with that, let's move directly on to what was 7.2, so our bioenergy project scoping study update. I recognize we're getting close to 7, so perhaps we can get through the presentation and then take a break if folks need it. Okay. Jen, take it away.
Great, thank you. So we have David Featherman with us today. He's on Zoom. We'll run the slideshow so you can see it in front of you. We embarked on this journey back in August. We're in partnership with the Fire District and the Airport District to really analyze possible solutions for our green waste. We're looking at it from multiple different lenses. Wildfire mitigation, green waste disposal, and of course, reducing methane release from treated products. So David actually completed the work with North Star, so he's very familiar with the area, and that is one of the main reasons we selected Wilder Consulting to do the study with us. This is really an update to the scoping study that was done. We looked at 7 different options, and we haven't narrowed down, but wanted to give you an update where we're at and get some direction going forward. So David, I'm hoping that you can hear us okay?
I can, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. With that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. I'm going to turn the camera off while the slides are on just to save bandwidth, and then I'll come back and we'll take questions afterwards, if that works.
That works great. And council members, the slides will be at your screens in front of you.
Okay. Jen, let me know when you've got the slides in front of everyone there. And while we do that, I just want to thank you to the members of the council, Mayor Henderson and Vice Mayor Romack, for the opportunity. And thanks, Jen, for teeing up the presentation. As Jen said, I'm going to be covering the findings and recommendations from our scoping study that we've conducted over the past 4 or 5 months. I led the effort from the standpoint of setting the framework, but certainly it was a team effort, and I'd like to just thank the wide range of people from both the town staff and the fire district and the airport district for all their valuable inputs to the process. So with that, Jen, let's flip slides. We'll go to the topics. I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible, but there's just a lot of ground that we've covered over the last several months, which is a good thing. I'll just give you a sense of how we proceeded through the study, the framework we use, the main takeaways that we've come up with at this point in the process. As Jen said, we have narrowed down the list of things that we've looked at to a set of 4 that we consider to be potentially viable. And we'll talk about some recommendations and next steps on where we can go from here. So next slide. So the background of the study, and just a quick background on myself, as Jen said, I've been fortunate to do a few projects over the last 3 to 4 years in the state of California and elsewhere. I started Wilder in 2015 expressly to support projects like this. I've worked in the biomass realm since about 2011, and I'm a civil engineer by training. I've been doing different types of environmental management projects for over 25 years. But for the folks who may be familiar with the small district heating system in Quincy, I was a part of that team that designed and implemented that project a few years ago. I've worked with the Plumas Unified School District and Alpine County and a few other folks in the state. So I've been able to bring some of the lessons learned from those projects to this effort, which has been exciting. So next slide, please. So as Jen said, this was really the first step called it a scoping study. This was the first step to try to identify potentially viable pathways for this biomass material other than the Eastern Regional Landfill. One of the first things that we did was look at the last 3 years of data that we got from TTSD and the town to see how much material we're actually disposing and what it's costing. And it turns out we're averaging currently about 25,000 cubic yards of material sending to the landfill each year. That equates to about 5,000 green tons of material or 4,000 bone dry tons. And so that'll become a reference point that we use throughout the study. It's important to note that we learned, and you probably are well aware of this, the tipping fees at the landfill have basically doubled since 2018. At that point, I believe the number was $6.35 a cubic yard. And as of last summer, that number is now $12.25 a cubic yard for disposal. And that's, again, just the tipping fee for receiving the material. That, coupled with an estimate that was developed in cooperation with all the team members, but particularly the fire district, in terms of how much material we think we're going to be seeing as Measure T is implemented over the next 3 to 5 years. The estimate is really 3 to 4 times the amount of green waste that we currently have. So if you extrapolate that out at the current tipping fee, that's in excess of $1 million a year of disposal. So that was sort of the baseline case that we were beginning with. And as Jen said, the idea is, what are the alternatives that we could potentially use to do something different with this material? So next slide. I don't know that we could have teed up this presentation any better with the previous one, but certainly SB 1383 is a driver here. The team agreed early on that the triple bottom line, just generally the principles of sustainability, was something that was going to be very important. So those were front of mind for the entire scoping study. And as Jen said, this was really a joint effort with the town, the fire district, and the airport district. We also did have Truckee Donner PUD at the table as, I guess you would say, an interested stakeholder, and they weighed in on a few key pieces of the study. And at the outset, it was there was a cluster of facilities that was identified really before the study began that seemed right potentially for implementing a project like this. And of course, with the North Star district heating project as sort of the backdrop, the idea was, is there a cluster of facilities that maybe we can offset some utility costs and find a productive way to use some of this green material? So if we go to the next slide, we can see the 5 facilities that we looked at specifically. There were 3 at the airport, which were the maintenance facility, the main administration building, and the warehouse office building across the street, as well as the Truckee Fire Station 96, and then the town hall. So these were the facilities where we collected 3 years of utility data and used that as a means of trying to assess whether there was an alignment between the quantity of material that we're expecting and potentially offsetting things like heat and power at these facilities. And I know you guys are very familiar with these facilities, but that whole circle there of all those facilities, there's about a quarter-mile radius. If you put a spot in the middle there, all those facilities are very closely clustered, and that's something that you tend to want to look for when you're thinking about siting something like a district heating system, for example. So that was a driver, basically the geography of those buildings. So next slide. This is kind of just conceptually, Jen alluded to this. The partners all have some unique priorities and drivers for their organizations, but there's a ton of overlap between the things that the fire district is trying to accomplish, the airport's trying to accomplish in the town. And so, we talked about that as a group, and really the greenhouse gas emissions angle, the idea of reducing fire risk is important, basically to everyone, but certainly, main priority for the fire district and important priority for the town. Cost becomes important because most of the facilities we looked at were on airport property. The utility costs for them were much higher. But there's a sensitivity for all folks involved with disposal costs going up. And so the idea was there's a lot of overlap, and how can we kind of, look for those areas of overlap and use that to drive the direction of the scoping study. So Next slide. The first thing we did was, based on kind of that overlap, we defined what is the core problem that we want to solve, because once you start talking about this, there's a lot of different things that we could try to accomplish, depending on the lens you're looking through. And so the group landed on these two main things, which were, number one, biomass removal. So reducing the risk of wildfire and improving defensible space by getting as much material out, as is appropriate and as there is budget for. And then secondly, reusing that in a productive way to try to either offset fossil fuel or reduce our carbon footprint in another way. And so something that rose out of that was a lot of discussion about biochar, and we'll get into that later in the presentation. But so removing and then productively reusing this material. And so based on that, then the team, before we kind of dug into the data, we developed what we called the project challenge statement. And that was like the bumper sticker or the slogan that we could use to kind of keep our focus on what we were trying to accomplish. And so we turned on that a little bit. The next slide is what we landed on. The challenge is to cost effectively reuse locally generated biomass waste to offset fossil fuel consumption while reducing greenhouse gas emissions and the risk of catastrophic wildfires. So there's a lot in there, but there's kind of two big drivers, which is wildfire risk and greenhouse gas reduction. And then to the extent that we can, the economics work and we can do things like offset fossil fuel consumption, so much the better. So that's where we ended up. And that's the sort of launching point for the actual analysis. And so I guess next slide, this is where we get into kind of how we went about reviewing different alternatives, pathways for the material. There's a great temptation sometimes in an analysis like this to just start with a laundry list of, we could do a heating system, we can do a power system, we can make pellets, we can make biochar. We took the opposite approach. I like to take this approach, which is to step back and say, what are the things we care about first? Let's figure that out. Let's itemize those things, and let's develop criteria first based on those things that we can then use as a means of evaluating the whole host of solutions that we'll come up with in the next step. And so that's what we did. And there were kind of these three overarching objectives in terms of those criteria. The first being the triple bottom line that I know you're all very familiar with, but the team felt strongly that any solution that was going to be judged to be viable or potentially effective would have to meet the triple bottom line, meaning it has to have a reasonable economic impact. It has to meet our environmental and our social impacts. So that's kind of number one. And then the other two, which I think are also very important, is that it should be community scale. And this actually, I think, ties into the first presentation on Visit Truckee. It's important that we're sensitive to context, and we know we're not developing a utility scale or industrial scale solution necessarily. We're looking to be community scale and appropriate for the context. And then secondly, that the solutions that we look at, we should be technology agnostic, meaning we're not predisposed to thinking that this is a heating solution or this is a pellet mill or this is anything in particular, that this is just, we're going to look at this from the perspective of, again, what's the objective we're trying to meet and what criteria are we going to use to try to measure that. So next slide, please. So there's a lot of criteria that we ended up with. We ended up with 15. We don't have to talk about each of these individually, but they are binned in 4 different buckets, if you will. The first being the technical criteria, and these are sort of, I consider these to be the foundational criteria. These are the kind of the screening mechanisms where, if something's not commercially available, for example, the first criteria, it's not going to probably pass through the screening process. Things like how quickly can it be implemented? Can it scale if the amount of waste that we want to process changes? Those sorts of things. So we looked at a range of technical criteria as listed here. The next slide, then we get into the triple bottom line elements, which are the economics of any solution. So we care about what does it cost from a capital standpoint to implement a solution? What does it cost to operate on an annual basis? And this, unique to this project, the ratepayer impact, potential ratepayer impacts for folks who purchase electricity from the PUD. We wanted to be sensitive to, if we were somehow going to impact that because we're implementing a very large power project that we wanted to kind of capture that in our analysis. So that was included. The environmental criteria are critically important, of course, and so we care about how much material we can reuse in a given solution or a given technology, what the life cycle greenhouse gas reduction would be from that given technology, and then also are there other community impacts associated with it? For example, is there any noise? Is there smoke? Is there an odor? Does it require a lot of additional trucking, that sort of thing? So we captured that. And then lastly, on the next slide, the social criteria. These overlap a lot with some of the previous categories, but really from a community standpoint, the idea was, can we demonstrate that our community is generating renewable power or making biochar or implementing a district heating system or a snow melt system? So very closely tied to some of those earlier ones, but these were kind of more of a, does it check this particular box? And we wanted to include those as criteria. So again, the end goal here is not to take a deep dive necessarily into any one solution. It's really to try to differentiate and whittle down from the universe of things that we could do, some subset of things that we think are potentially viable. So moving on then to the candidate solutions. So now that we've established what we're trying to achieve, how we're going to measure whether we've achieved that with a given solution, then we actually identified what are the range of solutions we want to consider. We thought about these, and I think about these in terms of the end products that we're potentially going to be producing. So rather than, again, this whole idea of technology agnostic, rather than being married to a particular approach, it's really, what do we end up with? And so the three major types of solutions that we ended up with were a disposal solution, which included the current pathway as kind of our baseline, and then some alternative disposal pathways, and then a category of biomass power solutions and a category of biomass heat solutions. And we'll see those in just a few slides. Once we had those categories, then we chose some representative or different types of pathways within each of those categories, because there are different alternative ways of kind of doing the same thing. So we'll talk about that. So the next slide just lists those individual candidates. Again, the baseline that we were using as a comparison point for all the other potential solutions was the continued disposal at the TTSD landfill. But then in addition to that, we identified two other potential just straight disposal options, essentially, for the material. The first was an air curtain burner, and you may be familiar with that technology, and we'll show some pictures of that in a little bit. But that's just a means of disposing on site rather than disposing at the landfill. And then sort of a variation on that theme is number 3, which is the air curtain burner with biochar. So it's similar technology, but it has a byproduct that could be potentially useful. And then in the realm of biomass power, we looked at, again, an air curtain burner that has a power generation component associated with it. That's a distinct way of making power with basically with waste heat, versus the other biomass power alternative, which is a gasifier with an engine generator. And some of you may be familiar with gasification, because I saw there were some questions that came in about that earlier. But that essentially is using a different technology to take the wood and turn it into a syngas, which is like a form of natural gas essentially, and then running that through an engine generator to make electricity. So a different technology. And then the next slide, we came up with 3 different potential heating pathways. The first is hydronic district heating, which is very comparable to what is being pursued at North Star, if you're familiar with that system design, which is a central boiler plant and then piping hot water to a number of facilities. The second one is a combined heat and power solution, which really just builds a small power generation component on top of a hydronic district heating system. And the third heating option is the biomass heat and biochar solution, which is a different technology altogether. It's a pyrolysis system whose main output is, as the name implies, heat and also biochar. In this case, a significant amount of biochar, and we'll talk about that when we get into the results. But so these were the 3 heating solutions. So in the end, as Jen said, we ended up with 7 alternatives to the baseline. So next slide. I know that you had an opportunity to see the draft scorecards that we developed as a result of this analysis, and so you're hopefully familiar with the structure. But the scorecard is something that I developed a number of years ago on a different project. It just became a really nice way of having a lot of information in a pretty compact format. And so we went through the process of filling out and reviewing and revising scorecards for all 7 of these candidates, plus the baseline disposal at the landfill for across all 15 criteria. And so in order to do that, I needed to develop a bunch of models for things like capital costs and operating costs, the different technologies, how much waste we could use for a given solution, what are the greenhouse gas implications for a given solution. So those things were modeled quantitatively. And then there were a lot of things that were really more qualitative in nature. And so those things ended up with, in some cases, a 3-point scale. Is this a low, medium, or high kind of thing in terms of how a given solution meets a certain criterion? Or in some cases, it was a yes, no. Like, does this produce biochar? Yes or no? Does the PUD required to be involved in implementing the solution? Yes or no? That sort of thing. So that all is then compiled into a scorecard, which you can see on the next slide. This is a template, a blank scorecard, essentially. There you go. And I know you've had a chance to look at these, but at the top of the scorecard would be just some general information about a given solution. I should note that for the purpose of the analysis, I chose what I would consider to be a representative technology or supplier for each solution. For example, the boiler system or a gasifier, there are a number of different suppliers that have products on the market, some of which I've worked with, some of which I haven't, but they're the particular suppliers that you see on the scorecards are not meant to be the preferred solution. They're just meant to be representative for the purpose of building models and kind of trying to do an apples to apples comparison across solutions. So I just want to point that out. And then at the lower half of the scorecard, you can see down the left side, those are the 15 criteria. We've got them by the 4 different types. And then in the scorecard itself, we would have a narrative evaluation of each of those individual criterion. And then on the right-hand side, there's a kind of an ultimate score that's usually a 3 or 4 point range score that is generated based on kind of the consensus of the team. So the next slide, if you flip, this is an example of a completed scorecard. And again, I know you've seen these, but we'll talk more about this when we get to the results. But the right-hand column becomes kind of maybe the most important part of doing the comparative analysis, where we've got these 3 different tiers or 3 different shades of blue, which indicate where a solution is scored on a given criterion. Dark blue is always better than medium blue, which is always better than light blue. And so that starts to become a visual indication of kind of the viability of a potential candidate solution. So let's see. Next slide, please. All right. So again, I tend to think of these types of projects or problems as kind of where's the intersection between these 3 different dimensions or these 3 different lenses of looking at the same problem. So it's on one hand, it's a disposal problem, or it's a problem of fuel or green waste in this case. We have potential loads that we could be serving, whether those are heat or electricity. And then we have different technologies that we can use to use that fuel and to serve those loads potentially. Where do those things intersect? So this was kind of the framework, again, that we used. So we'll step through these kind of in pairwise to do a comparison. So if we go to the next slide, we'll start with just looking at how does the fuel that we know we have and that we expect that we're going to have soon in the next 3 to 5 years with Measure T, how does that align with, for the 5 facilities that we've decided to look at, how does that align with the amount of fossil fuel that we're consuming? So the next slide shows that comparison. In the case of, in the slides here, I've used the 4,000 bone dry tons, which is, if you'll recall, what we're currently sending to the landfill. This is not, and that's going to expect to be increasing to something on the order of 14,000 bone dry tons in the next 3 to 5 years. But for the purpose of these slides, I've used the 4,000. So first looking at electricity. So we looked at 3 years worth of utility data, both on the electrical and on the heating side for those 5 facilities. And what we discovered is that the facilities collectively are using about 780 megawatt hours of electricity each year, which is costing about $120,000. And this is, again, for all 5 facilities, so for all 3 of the partners combined. And we've got breakouts, of course, of all that in more detail. To put that in context of the waste material that we're talking about, 4,000 bone dry tons would be sufficient to generate roughly 3,400 megawatts of electricity. So roughly 4 times the amount of electricity that's being consumed currently by these 5 facilities. And then on the heating side, it's even kind of a more stark difference. The 5 facilities are currently using about 3,800 million BTUs of heat annually, which is costing about $40,000. And the 4,000 bone dry tons of biomass, assuming you could use all that material in a heating solution, would be enough to produce something on the order of, say, 47,000 million BTUs of heat. So 12 times what's currently being used. So the main takeaway here was there's really much, much more fuel already. And this is before stepping up to the 14,000 tons, but there's already more fuel than would be, far more than would be needed to supply either heat or electricity or both to these 5 facilities. The other related dimension here is that the $160,000 that's being spent on the fossil fuels from the utilities is probably not nearly enough on an annual basis to offset a really large capital investment. So like a boiler plant that's going to cost $5 or $6 or $7 million, it's going to be really hard to make that pencil if you're only able to offset $160,000 a year. So that's an important takeaway that becomes even more important later. So let's go to the next slide. And so the second lens we looked at was aligning or trying to see how well aligned the fuel that we have is with the technologies that we're considering. And so in the next slide, you can see, again, thinking back to our disposal, power, and heating families of solutions or types of solutions. For something like an air curtain burner, you're talking about, 5 to 15 tons an hour through a system like that. And so you think about 4,000 bone dry tons, and that's operating, say, 40 hours a week. You could get through all that material in 2 to 3 months, something like that. Versus something like a 1 megawatt gasifier plant with an engine generator to make power. The 4,000 bone dry tons in that context would be about 2/3 of an annual fuel supply needed to run a system that size. Versus a heating system, and I chose 7 million BTUs per hour here, and for the analysis generally, for reference, that's the size of the system that's going in at North Star, just to give you some more context. That system would operate on just about 4,000 bone dry tons a year, somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000. So there's a case where the fuel that we know we have is pretty well matched to a certain solution. However, as we touched on in the previous slide, a boiler that size would be far too large to be appropriate for the cluster of facilities that we're looking at. So there's a little bit of a disconnect that's starting to reveal itself. I think, and we can talk about this later, specifically related to gasification, but my sense is that there is certainly fuel and sufficient quantities of fuel that all 3 of these types of solutions are potentially viable. I don't think there's any necessary limitation that we've identified as of yet. Okay, so next slide, and our last lens that we'll look at is the loads versus the technology. So again, heating and electricity versus biomass utilization, how do those things align? So next slide, this sort of kind of ties the previous 2 lenses in a way together, but from a technology standpoint, I'll just say that Generally speaking, it's probably easier to implement a heating system. It's just more of a tried and true low tech solution. Making electricity from biomass is a little more challenging, certainly doable, but it's just a little bit more complex from a technological standpoint. From a financial standpoint, if you remember some of the previous slides, at least the facilities we looked at, the current electricity bill made up 3/4 of the total spend every year, the 120,000 out of the 160,000, so the 40,000 for heat. So from a financial standpoint, making power is a lot more compelling, perhaps. But the challenges here, though, are going the power route would require either a net metering agreement with the PUD or a power purchase agreement, specifically if you are going to a larger generating facility. And so that's just to say that that's something that would require some sort of outside collaboration outside of the three partners. On the heating side, the issue really is that the density is not there for the cluster buildings that we looked at. And again, comparing that to something like the North Star Village, where there is just a tremendous density of heating. I think it's probably in the order of 10 times the heating, natural gas heating that's going on in the village versus the cluster that we looked at here. And we did talk about, well, the town has a lot of facilities. Could we stretch the boundaries of that cluster and try to capture some other things? We certainly can do that. But as you might imagine, it's from a heating standpoint, particularly because you're talking about buried piping, sending hot water long distances, and efficiency gets impacted and that sort of thing. It just becomes much more complex. The ideal scenario for heating is that you have a very geographically, closely clustered sort of high use facilities that you can send the heat to. And so it's not clear that we have that here, or it's in some cases clear that we don't have that here probably. All right, next slide. So what are our takeaways? Before we show kind of what got kept and what got dropped, just to say that, again, we developed project-specific models for the utility usage and for the green waste and for the greenhouse gases specific to to this particular project. The CapEx estimates were, in some sense, a little bit more generic, but certainly drawn from either past projects or discussions directly with suppliers. And we used a 25-year design life as sort of a standard baseline for all the technologies that we looked at. So anything that we looked at that's in the scorecards, we just assumed it's a 25-year design life, both from that includes on the operating side. And then just a caveat, I guess, to say that again, especially the capital cost, it's more of a rough order of magnitude. We tried to kind of come within the $1 to $2 million range. And so, it might say a combined heat and biochar plant is $7 million. It might be 6, it might be 8. But the idea is that how can we distinguish, differentiate across these different technologies? It's not to get an exact price for any given technology. So with that being said, I think there's one more slide before we get to the summary scorecard. So once we had individual scorecards, we basically could take that right-hand column, which has the color-coded scales that are scored for each of the criterion, and line those up together, lay them out on a single scorecard, start to look at where do we have more dark blue and where do we have more light blue, as a way of kind of distinguishing better from worse in terms of performance. So the next slide is the summary scorecard, where you can, and we take lots of questions if you want. We don't have probably time to go into any detail of this, but just to show that you can clearly see visually that there are certain dimensions that certain technologies perform much better than others. And this becomes, at the top you see there's either a green or an orange cell that says keep or drop. And so the 4 that are green that say keep, those were the 4. The 7 that we decided were warranting some further investigation perhaps. And we'll look at some pictures of those in just a second. Really quickly, the technical impacts on the next slide. The partners decided, in terms of how to decide what to keep and what to drop, we really kind of landed on, we want these solutions to be scalable. We want them to be operationally efficient, and we want to use proven technologies. We don't necessarily want to be on the bleeding edge of technology on things that haven't been proven. Other than having a grid connection, all these solutions can be implemented by the partners, so that's not an issue. All these could be operational within the next 2 years, assuming things continue to progress fairly quickly. And so there's multiple solutions that are commercially available and technically robust. So that's not a barrier. From an economic side, next slide, we've got a wide range of capital cost here. We've got something as cheap as $300,000 and something as expensive as $15 million. And we can talk about those, and you can see those on the scorecards. The operating costs are in the range of $100,000 to $500,000, $100,000 to $500,000 a year. The net operating costs, and so we looked at not only what does it take to run the system, but if we're offsetting electricity, if we're offsetting heat, we're selling biochar, what's the net operating expense of the entire system? And you can see there's some cases where there's a net savings on an annual basis, and then there's another case where you're spending almost as much on that solution as you are at sending the material to TTSD. So quite a wide range. All of the solutions, though, were less expensive than continuing down the path of the baseline. And then I think next to last, environmental impacts, and this is critically important, I think, the green waste reuse. So there are some solutions that use just a small fraction, or maybe not small fraction, but say 30% of the material that we expect to have. There are others that can use all the material, and so that becomes an important consideration. The greenhouse gas reductions are, again, quite a wide range. We can save anywhere from 9,000 to 168,000 metric tons of CO2 over 25 years, depending on the solution. What we found was that the solutions that involved the production of biochar are have much a greater impact on the carbon footprint than those that don't. And so those become much more valuable in that sense than even offsetting fossil fuels. Yeah, so I think that's the most important takeaway on the environmental side. And then lastly, the social impacts. Really, again, SB 1383 is a big driver, and biomass power could be a means of achieving some of that, those targets. I think, Jen, maybe one more slide ahead. Social impacts, there we go. So something to consider for SB 1383 targets. And then on the biochar, we touched on this earlier, but there is some significant financial uncertainty or sensitivity around, how much could we sell and how much, can we produce and what's the market for that biochar? So that's something that we think probably warrants some more investigation before committing to that pathway. Okay, so this is where we ended up. So the 4 solutions that seem potentially viable are 2 different forms of an air curtain burner, one with biochar byproduct, which is the tiger cat, and one without. And a biomass power solution, which was a gasifier with an engine generator, and then a biomass heating solution, which was, again, the pyrolysis system, combined heat and biochar. And we've got some pictures of these coming here in the next few slides, so you can get a visual of what we're talking about. So this is a typical air curtain burner. These have been used for 30 years or so, and there's many that have been used in California. So theoretically, if we could do permitting, this is a very much a viable solution. The next slide is a very similar technology, but one that is mobile. You can see that it's on tracks, and so this can be a little bit more flexible in terms of going to where the waste is. And this also produces biochar. It's designed to produce biochar as a byproduct. It does require 3,000 gallons of water per day to quench the char. And so that's, from an environmental standpoint, consideration that may become important. The next slide is just a schematic of what a gasification plant might look like. This is obviously a much more capital intensive solution. This is a 3-story building with a 1 megawatt power generation facility. It makes biochar as well. 2 full-time operators. It's obviously a much more significant endeavor. And then lastly, the PyroCal. This is a modular system for making heat and biochar. This is one module. We used 4 modules together for the modeling that we did, which is kind of more appropriately sized for the amount of material we're talking about. Yeah, so let's let's wrap up here with the recommendations on the next slide. So as many questions as we answered, I think through the scoping study, there were some important uncertainties that arose in the process of doing the work. Things like, what will the tipping fees at TTSD be 3 years from now? And is there a way to try to forecast that? Do we have sufficient, high quality wood for something like a gasification plant? What are the permitting limits for air burners, if there are any? How can we work with the PUD to determine whether we can get a PPA in place, and what the cost of that, what the credit for that might look like, what the rate might be? And so these are some of the recommendations that are covered in the proposed refinement study. But really the answer, I guess, last slide, Jen, is, the idea would be to take, if we could whittle the 4 down to something like 2, that would probably be preferable before diving into something like a feasibility study, because really you want the feasibility study to be kind of a proof of concept. I have worked with clients. I worked with a client very recently who spent $100,000 doing a feasibility study of 2 very different technologies, a heating and a power solution, neither of which ended up being feasible. And so they spent just a ton of money on a report that essentially, is sitting on a shelf. So the idea would be, if we do just a little bit more digging, we could maybe whittle down to 2, and then you'd be teed up to do a feasibility study. There's a significant amount of grant funding that I'm sure you're probably aware of from CAL FIRE and the Forest Service and others to fund those studies. And implementation timeline is, again, probably 2 to 3 years for some of the larger. Obviously, an air curtain burner would be shorter than that, but something like a gasifier or some kind of heating system, 2 to 3 years is a reasonable timeline to think about. And that's the timeline that we've kind of marched down with the North Star project. So that's a lot of material. Thank you for your patience. Look forward to questions. My contact information is on the last slide. And yeah, thanks. I think you said you might take a break, and I'm happy to stick around for as long as we need to.
David, thank you so much. That was really comprehensive. I really appreciate the detail. Let's take a 10-minute break, because I know it is about 7:30. So the clock is showing 7:28, so we'll come back at 7:38 and move right into council questions. Thank you, everyone.
I was totally jumping from this container, so it's really not the Whoppers. I had a Whopper.
Economic model kind of assumes
Dark chocolate.
it's like chocolate. This is disgusting. You're not nearly as, I guess. This is only 60% emails. Oh, that's not I tried not to. I did see it. I did see that.
I'll harvest them and mail them like that. He also likes Necco wafers. He has just like horrible taste. Necco wafers come from
Didn't show up. Didn't show up on that store.
I feel like he's not lived through the Depression, but he likes like Depression era candy, like there's like gum.
They're all right, and they were like, cool. Right. So they were just like, we trust our
Oh, yeah.
as a matter of fact. In Placer County, they had sent down the crime because they were organized and clear. Speak it into existence. Let's do it. And that's what I said. I think it's also just trust because it's honest. It's not like just you know, that company go.
Surprised I didn't have any.
I followed it. That would be a good duration to be or whatever. So
It was just like way strong. And they had it like it's literally just like almost broke out of all friends. It was the most exciting part of the podcast.
Gemma was your best. I don't know.
My second grade was 2 optimistic.
you know, I think he's smarter than or he was he's really smart. Yeah. I think he was. And it worked. Yes. Except it didn't work. And you know, and the only reason I think I actually saw it because somebody's like, hey, you got called out again on this. You know, and I was like, oh, sure, I did. I'm like, that's why I got off next door. The first week after COVID, I was just getting blown up and I couldn't deal with it. I was just like, I gotta shut this thing off. Like, this is not cool. Mentally. But good for me. Yeah, I think he's going to do it. I think he's of course so because they're not going to be the voice of reason, right? When everybody's like, I was going to bring you along. It's just certain things, you know, like it's political discourse. Want to, right? And they try to find ways to do it, but then you're like, you gotta get this in, you know, like hit that one.
So trying to talk.
Yeah,
like it makes me be on the camera.
Yeah.
Instead of just Grayson, it's like a creepy voice that comes out. Bixby.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate
like we need more cameras. Really fun angle to stare at the dog from.
Working, you know,
so there. She's watching him. That's her couch.
It's so wild.
I do. I
So much is in place.
I just like you're in bed and there's usually either the background tree or
yeah, it basically They're fine. See what it can do.
I didn't let her get in the river yesterday because it was below freezing, but she got all the way to the river on Sunday.
Oh, Jen, you and your consultants. Come on.
She usually doesn't get too bad of like some balls attached to her, but she got wet. So, yeah, she was very happy about it. Jen has been very gracious.
I think the Advil's wearing off.
Oh, no.
I'd have a cap. I have Advil. I'm not gonna go check. We want to get back there and whatever happens, my office happens. Yeah. He's fine. Nobody's walking by over there. And he wasn't even bad with that.
Alan popped her just walked by. She freaked out.
Oh, right. No, that's the thing. He's not even barking when people walk. He's doing that before, so he's okay with that part.
Hey, area people. I mean, I had a buddy, one of my friends from San Francisco, just came up and he goes, dude, it's like a different world up here.
It is.
You know?
Yeah.
He put his mask on. We were sitting on KT yesterday. He and I were
Jealous that you got out.
I know. Two people were on each end, and he like whips out his mask like
On the chairlift.
And these other two guys, like, we didn't know. I just look at this is what my closest friend 25 years. I'm like, really, dude? You haven't had your mask on down. You're gonna put it on.
Right now,
Run
Julie,
yeah.
Yeah.
We all just like, even the two dudes on the left, I was like, you are so pretentious. It's like not gonna cut it.
Tone it down. Yeah. Everybody good?
Yeah.
Okay, I will call us back to order. We are on agenda item 7.2, our bioenergy project scoping study update, and we're moving right into council questions. Councilmember Klofstad, do you have any questions?
I submitted some questions in advance, and thank you very much for answering those. I think the presentation was quite thorough. The only thing that I am looking at is whether or not there is a consideration for the electricity generated in that option, whether or not it could be stored.
So the study did not consider that explicitly, but that is certainly something that I think should be considered if that option were to move on to a feasibility study.
Okay. And that mainly because, as I was just considering, that Truckee, like most other municipalities, has that really dirty energy in the duck curve during the dusk period from dusk to about 10 o'clock at night. And so if this electricity generation could be concentrated to support that time period where we're buying dirty fuel, that could be a pretty huge impact and accomplish our overall goal of 100% renewable. So I think it's something that I would love to see considered if other council members were interested.
Thank you for that. Any additional questions? That's it? Okay. Councilmember Pallavi, do you any questions?
I do not have any questions. Thank you. And I support whatever Anna was presenting. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
As one of the things we should be considering. Councilmember Klostad, I approve.
Okay, thank you for that. Vice Mayor Romack, do you have any questions?
No further questions, thank you.
Councilmember Zabriskie, do you have questions?
Yes, there's frequent reference to avoided anaerobic or avoided decomposition, then avoided anaerobic decomposition. I thought I saw a fairly high percentage of the decomposition being anaerobic from wood chips, something like 50%. Is that correct?
It would depend on, for example, if you're discussing piles say piles in the forest, it would depend on sort of the depth of the piles and the way the material was distributed. But no, not typically would you see something that high. You might see something like 90% aerobic and 10% anaerobic.
Okay.
But the issue is that even that 10% can become incredibly potent because you are generating methane at that point. So that even a small percentage can have a large outsized impact.
Yeah. But then it's a 12-year lifespan versus 1,000 years for CO2.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
When you were talking about a power plant, is the example you're using in the table about a 1 megawatt or 1.5 megawatt plant?
We used a 1 megawatt as just a starting point for the scoping study, just because it's sort of big enough to, again, we were thinking about how much material we have and thinking about the loads at the facilities, but it's big enough to, to have a substantial impact, but it's not getting into what I would call utility scale. You may be familiar with, there are some plants in California that are kind of in that being developed in the 3 to 5 megawatt range as part of the biomat program. That would be kind of the next step up. And then if you think about a plant, like if you're familiar with Loyalton or some of the other larger cogen plants, those are more in the, I think, 20 to 30 megawatt range.
Okay.
So the 1 meg is sort of what I would consider to be large for community scale, if that makes sense.
Okay. And so with a 1 megawatt plant, in terms of supplying energy for the town of Truckee, do you have any sense of how much of the power demand could be supplied during the nighttime?
I would imagine it's a very small fraction. Let me refer just to the slides that we did look at. It would be a very small fraction. Very small fraction.
Under 10% then?
Yeah.
At the beginning of your presentation, you're talking about the need to be community scale. What did you mean by that?
I think about a lot of things. I think about even the architecture of the facility. I think about how many trucks are coming in and out of the facility, the size of a stack, if there is one, noise, just having something that can coexist peacefully, if you will, in a community rather than something that is kind of an island unto itself. I mean, I think maybe the landfill is something you can think about as an example where, you need a kind of a significant buffer zone around a facility once you get to a certain scale, visually and just, like I said, sound-wise, that sort of thing.
Okay. And then if we were going to be operating a facility as a heat source, would that mean we'd be harvesting during the summer and stockpiling it for combustion during the winter, correct?
That could very well be the case. And again, a couple of times I referenced the North Star project. One of the reasons that project's so attractive is because there are these significant heating loads year round from things like spas and heated swimming pools down the village. So even in the off season,
more often.
I guess it's the North Star Property Owners Association Rec Center, I think. So it kind of takes a little bit of that seasonality away. Certainly there is obviously more demand in the wintertime, but it's not quite so stark. Whereas these facilities, the curve did pretty much follow the the seasonal pattern pretty closely. So you're right, you would be storing in the summer and consuming in the winter.
Okay. Biochar is something new to me. I realize there's a lot of unknowns surrounding it. Can you give us an idea of what we presently know about the future value of biochar as a commercial product?
Yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, for sure, in terms of, biochar production is highly variable, dependent on the technology that's producing it, depending on the feedstock, and then the application of biochar for a particular agricultural purpose or water filtration system. The market, as I understand it, has yet to really evolve to the point where it's very efficient in terms of matching inputs and outputs. So that's one thing. And then related to that, you asked about the pricing. So we used a really conservative number of $50 a cubic yard as a potential sales price for biochar.
Okay.
That, there are folks that are paying 5 or 6 times that amount for specific applications, but those are pretty narrow. So I tried to err on the side of being conservative in all the quantitative analyses that we did. But that would certainly be, especially so the combined heat and biochar solution, which is one of the 4 that is still standing, if you will. That project, a project of that scale, of that type, we forecast could generate something like $1 million a year in revenue potentially from biochar. Now, that obviously affects the payback of that project. If there could be a scenario, we talked about this as a team, there could be scenarios where a project is economically feasible without the biochar, but then the biochar becomes an add-on. And if over time a market develops, then it just makes the project pay back that much sooner. But maybe we don't necessarily require that market to be available to us immediately in order to make the project pencil.
Okay. With the capital cost of $15 million on the power facility, do you see that as being economically feasible?
That is going to depend almost entirely on the power purchase agreement that was put in place with the Truckee Donner PUD.
Okay.
I mean, that is absolutely consequential to whether that project works or not. And so we use a number of 10 cents a kilowatt hour, which is, very much an educated guess. We had a couple discussions with the PUD. The retail rate that the cluster is paying right now is in the 15 to 16 cents a kilowatt hour range. In discussions I had with the PUD, they said a power purchase agreement, the rate that they would be willing to sign up to would be somewhere between 5 cents and 15 cents probably, right? That's a tremendous range that, the difference between 10 cents and 12 cents would probably make a big difference in whether the project pencils. So that is something that absolutely would need to be narrowed down. And that was something that actually came up fairly late in the analysis. We had some discussions where it sounded like, maybe a net metering scenario for some of the smaller options anyway was going to be something that they would consider. And then they talked about it internally and came back later and said, we're getting pretty close to our cap for net metering. And I can't remember what that cap is exactly, but they thought they were going to hit their cap within the next year or two. They saw this project as potentially sort of setting a precedent for potentially other projects that would come after it. So they felt like after discussing it some more, the power purchase agreement is probably the way we'd end up having to go here. And so in that case, it would be whatever is negotiated between the town, for example, and the PUD in terms of what that rate would be. And that would absolutely drive the economics of a project like that.
Okay. David, my last question is part in reference to the transportation costs, moving the fuel from where it's cut to where it's going to be burnt. If the Loyalton plant were to come online and they were willing to buy the Measure T fuel, would you be recommending that the fuel go to Loyalton instead of the town of Truckee? doing a biomass or building a biomass facility here in the town.
Would I be recommending that as a way of, are you talking about specifically about trucking?
I'm talking rather than building a power plant in Truckee to process the Measure T fuel, the 14,000 bone-dry tons. You know, the 10,000 from Measure T and then the other 4,000. Rather than sending those to a plant in Truckee, if Loyalton came online, would you recommend that that material go to Loyalton rather than our spending the money?
Yeah, I mean, no, not necessarily.
Okay.
If, thinking again about that Venn diagram, if you could have an alignment between the amount of material, the loads that you could serve, and the cost of implementing a certain technology, not necessarily. Obviously the trucking is a lot more of a burden to take it however many miles it is to Loyalton versus having it stay local. But that it's not, I don't think the answer would be that cut and dried. You'd have to look at the economics of both cases.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Klofstad, I understand you might have another question?
One more, David, thank you. It appears there could be, and perhaps you're already looking at this way, that there could be a short-term solution and then a longer-term solution, particularly if we're looking at the gasifier with biochar or the combined heat with biochar. Those are going to take years to build, and yet the air curtain burner could be something, as you said, could be done as soon as this summer. I'm wondering if we are looking at that, of having kind of two tracks, a short-term and a long-term, and then follow-up to that is there a used market for air curtain burners?
Yeah, the answer is yes. We've actually talked about the two-track approach. I think it makes a lot of sense. The permitting is something that came up a little bit late in the game for the air curtain burner, and so I know there's some folks on Gen staff that are looking into that. But normally the availability of those units is really rapid. It's a couple of months to get one from the time you place an order to have delivered. I was told when I talked to them really recently that it's more like 6 months now, and I guess they're having their own supply chain issues. So it is actually getting a little bit close to the timeline in terms of getting one this year. But I certainly think it's worth looking at a short term versus a long term solution. I should have mentioned I'm not sure about, I think there probably is a used market, I say, because there's also a rental option, or you can, but at least for the Tiger Cat unit, I know they do monthly leases. And so it's, rather than spend $700,000 on the system, you can lease it for say $30,000 a month and try it, see if it works before you commit to buying it. So there's definitely some alternative procurement solutions that should be looked at.
Councilmember Klofstad, Bob Womack has actually done quite a bit of research on not only availability, but also permitting. So Bob, do you want to add anything? You can go there, you can come up here, either one.
Thank you, Bob. I heard whispers that you were looking into this.
Yeah, so as far as the Tiger Cat, there's actually a dealer in Reno that has them available. I don't, when you ask them what's available, of course we can get that to you in 2 weeks. Yeah. we got to be a little bit more realistic, but they are available there. There is air curtain, the rental market, like David said, is certainly strong. There's they gave me 7 or 8 names of different folks within California, but everybody in California is trying to do the same thing we are. As far as permitting, if we're just doing a straight air curtain burner, then that permitting is probably not that big a deal between now and summer. The Northern Sierra Air Quality has already said, hey, it's not a big deal for us, submit a permit and we'll get it through. Again, very general conversations, and really the local level would be what we'd have to deal with. If you move into biochar, it changes the complexity greatly. And that probably is something that would, I don't know, I can't say we couldn't get it done this summer, but there's a whole nother process there when David mentioned the water and you have to quench it and now you have to deal with the water and all that.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that. I think it would be really helpful to just at least try this out, get an understanding of what it takes and where it would need to be and all that sort of stuff. I just see a lot of benefits of doing that kind of trial run, not the least of which would be it would help us on our SB 1383 for the 2022 year. So I would love to see that happen if that's possible. Thank you for looking into it.
The only other thing I would add that we haven't even explored is how we would staff anything this summer. So that's another unknown that we'd have to figure out.
Okay.
Can I ask a question related to that then?
Please.
Do you need, what sort of staff would be needed for that? Is that something that you have to hire people who have specific skill set? No? Okay.
No, the air curtain burner is basically a waste bin that you fire up a motor and you dump product into. So you need basically an equipment operator. But there is a lot that goes with that because you got to direct people in and you got to stack and unload and all that kind of stuff. So it's not totally simple, but it's not something that's specialized.
Yeah, we modeled 2 operators full-time essentially for something like an air curtain burner, 8 hours a day, 2 FTE as part of our operating costs.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay. Well, with that, we will move to open public comment, and we do not have any members of the public with us this evening at this point here. So we will also close public comment immediately and move immediately into deliberation. We do not need to make a motion on this, so this is just to provide direction to staff to pursue the second phase scoping study. Councilmember Klofstad, I will turn it back over to you.
And I am in full support. I really appreciate the analysis and fully support the 4 that you are recommending to move forward. I understand we already have, the fire district has approved this plan as well, and the airport is seeing it tomorrow. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great.
They haven't received the whole presentation, but they've consented to moving forward.
Yeah, as we are one of 3 agencies. So I am in full support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Pallavi.
Full support.
Wonderful. Vice Mayor Romack.
Me too.
Councilmember Zabriskie.
Well, I'm in full support of this stage of the process. I just want to note that in terms of these alternatives, I'm very hopeful that we can head in the direction of either the heating or the electricity generation. I'm concerned about the air burner because even though we're not counting the burning of the forest fuels as fossil fuels. We're not counting them as greenhouse gas emissions. They are, in fact, greenhouse gas emissions. We're accelerating the emissions. So I'm really hoping we can end up over on the right-hand side of this table.
I also support moving forward with the sort of refined scoping study, and my understanding is we're going to do some of the things that you're talking about, Councilmember Zabriskie. We're going to be confirming sort of anticipated future costs, confirming fuel specifications, really investigating biochar as sort of a revenue generation source, and I think I also heard some support for looking at both short-term and long-term pathways, which I would certainly support. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think with that, Jen, do you feel like you have the direction that you need to move forward?
I do. I think I'm clear. David, are you clear?
I am, yeah. Thank you so much for all the input and for all your time. And if any other questions come up, absolutely reach out and be happy to answer anything else that comes.
Great. David, thank you so much for being here with us this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. We will move on to item 8, council reports. Councilmember Pallavi, would you like to kick us off?
Attended a Visit Truckee Tahoe board meeting, of which you all heard the results of. We hired a consultant to start working on the Truckee Stewardship Council and some other setups there. I'm not sure what else I did. I'm not seeing much. I attended one of the Mountain Housing Council Lunch and Learn sessions. I think Councilmember Romack was on there, and Jenna Gatto was one of the presenters. That was great. And other than that, that was all. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Romack.
Yep, I'll jump in. It's all good. I also attended the Lunch and Learn series with the Mountain Housing Council that Councilmember Pallavi was at, talking a lot about, SB 9 and a lot of stuff we've heard, but it was still very informative. Also, last week spoke at the North Tahoe Truckee Leadership. Their monthly workshop was here at Town Hall. So Supervisor Bullock and I were both here and just encouraged everyone to get involved. And I think those were my main big things.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Klofstad.
Just double checking. I spent a bit of time this week talking to possible future REACH Code committee participants and honing in on what that commitment is going to be and what we're going to be expecting out of those people. I think we have some excellent candidates, possibly. Watched another REACH Code webinar today because doesn't everybody do that for fun? And I also watched a sustainable procurement webinar, which I also found really fascinating. I would like to just take a moment to give a shout out to Flowtech, the Contractors Association of Truckee Tahoe, and Western Nevada Supply, who are going to be putting on a seminar for heat pump technology specific to our climate in our region, and that is going to be March 22nd. Is that right? Well, that's what they
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. And then also at Western Nevada Supply the next day in the morning, 12:30 on, at CAT offices, or the 23rd on, at 9 o'clock at Western Nevada Supply. So getting the word out.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Exciting to hear that. Councilmember Zabriskie.
I met with John Spahn to talk about the Donner Land Trust, where they're thinking of going now with their projects. Met with Patrick Flora, the new lobbyist for CAT, and then in my neighborhood, we're working on forming a Firewise community, and I attended one of those meetings.
Wonderful. I met with Mason Fong and Marjan Solon from the governor's office. They're speaking with California mayors and supervisors over the coming year. They really wanted perspectives on the needs of rural communities. So we talked about the California budget surplus, the governor's priorities in wildfire prevention, housing, transportation, other areas, one of which was biomass and potentially more funding opportunities coming up out of the GoBiz office. Jen and I attended our mayors and managers meeting down in Nevada City, which was so nice because we were actually able to do that in person just this past week. And then I met with the Friends of the Library as well, just to continue sort of movement on the library and discussions and momentum on that. I think those were the key items for me. So with that, I will adjourn us to our regular meeting of the Truckee Town Council on March 8th. Thank you, everyone.